What's up everyone, how are you all? Today we are back with another amazing Naruto story. What if Naruto Reborn as Kimiko Yuhi? If you enjoy then please like, share and do comments, and also check the description to original creator of this beautiful creation. Kimiko Yuhi. That was the name that was given to her, and it took most of her infancy to get used to. And, well, it was weird being called a name so far from her own. A name that felt more fitting for someone a sea away from where she'd come from. Isekai'd into Naruto after a car accident. It sounded like the premise of every cash grab anime from the past decade. The kind where the protagonist woke up with overpowered abilities and a destined harem. Only this wasn't some cheesy show, it was her life now. And what a life it was. She hadn't even read the manga, just watched the anime a decade ago when she was younger. Still, the series was iconic enough that she remembered the broad strokes. Kurama, Tak no Jutsu, the Chunin exams, the Akatsuki, and the looming chaos of war. Knowing all this, it didn't comfort her, it terrified her. Her entire existence had been flipped upside down. Some omnipotent being had ripped her consciousness from her mangled body, created an entirely new character in a world she barely remembered, and shoved her into it. It was absurd, cruel, even. But after 3 days of sleeping, crying, and crapping herself, she began to resign herself to the reality. Whether it was some kind of neurological phenomenon or something else didn't matter. She was Kimiko now, or at least someone in Kimiko's place. The youngest daughter of the Yuhi household. A citizen of Konohagakure. And judging by the number of visitors coming to offer their congratulations, her birth had been something of an event. At first, she didn't pay much attention to them. She was too preoccupied trying to decide if this was real or some hour before death delirium. But there's only so long a person can philosophize in circles before reality demands acknowledgement. When she finally started paying attention, she noticed how uncanny the people looked. Unnatural hair colors, striking eyes. Not inhuman, but different. They reminded her of someone on the train wearing an elaborate cosplay costume on a random Wednesday. You might spare them a glance, maybe tell a coworker about them later, but eventually, you'd forget. Here, though, it was normal. Mundane, even. The weirdness of it all eventually faded into the background, but some visitors stuck out in her memory. One of the first was a severe-looking man with blank white eyes, accompanied by someone nearly identical. Her father greeted them warmly, giving one a firm handshake. She knew why. It was the Hyuga twins. Hiyashi and Hisashi, wasn't it? The one who died for a reason that escaped her. The two men exchanged a few polite words in the living room, her mother hosting with grace. Though separated by the nursery's paper walls, Kimiko could make out fragments of the conversation. Her father congratulated Hisashi on his son, Neji, born just months earlier. Hisashi's tone softened when he spoke of his boy, pride evident even from a distance. Before they left, Hiyashi gifted her a wooden rattle. It was simple, but something about it amused her, maybe because it was the first tangible thing in this new life that felt real. Other visitors followed, a heavy-set man with a mane of red hair, flanked by a sandy-haired ninja and a scarred, lazy-looking man. And after them, 2 teenage boys were dragged in by her sister, Kurenai. One with a scarred cheek, the other tall and spiky-haired, sneaking wistful glances at Kurenai when he thought no one was watching. Then came an elderly couple, dignified and wise despite their age. When her father bowed low and addressed the man as Sandame, she understood who he was. The third Hokage, huh? Maybe Shinku's some big shot. The 2 men smoked their pipes while her elderly wife took tea with her mother, speaking about things like the current state of the village. She would have paid more attention to them, but her mother hurriedly handed her off to Kurenai, who put her to sleep quite easily. Yet despite all of the visitors, none captured her attention like the last set of visitors. They arrived one quiet evening when her mother was lulling her to sleep. The door creaked open, and her mother, expecting her husband, hurried to greet the newcomers. Her eyes widened a little as she recognized them. Her father was there, yes. But 2 people accompanied him. A man with golden hair and blue eyes, his white long coat trailing behind him, stood beside a radiant woman with a prominent baby bump and striking crimson hair. Not ginger, red, crimson like blood, Minato and Kushina. Her mother, startled but gracious, moved to bow, only for Kushina to laugh. None of that, Kaori-san. We came here as friends. I am sure you did. Kaori replied, recovering with a warm smile, but I must apologize for not preparing for the Hokage and his wife's visit. Kimiko's mind raced throughout the entire conversation. Minato was Hokage, and Kushina was pregnant, though not heavily so. That meant this was just months before that happened. The Kyuubi, the chaos, the destruction, the deaths of so many, including the smiling couple before her. We appreciate the thought, Minato said warmly, his voice radiating calm authority. But you and Shinku Dono should focus on your new addition. She's what matters most. She was a handful at first, Kaori admitted, a touch of pride in her tone, but she's been crying less. It's like she's paying attention to the people around her. Kimiko almost laughed at that. If only you knew. Do you want to hold her, Hokage-sama? Kushina-san? Minato stepped forward, taking her carefully into his arms. His blue eyes were warm, his expression one of quiet reverence. Beside him, Kushina looked down with a blend of longing and affection. And Kimiko's heart broke. These two would be gone in months. Betrayed by someone they trusted. Konoha would burn, and their son would grow up alone, scorned by the very village they died to protect. She felt tears welling up and, before she could stop herself, began to wail. Loud, petulant cries that seemed far too fitting for the infant she now was. Oh, apologies, Kaori-san, Minato stammered, flustered. The Hokage doesn't need to apologize for an infant's expected behavior, Kaori said gently. She's probably just tired. I'll put her to bed. Her mother's soothing voice and the warmth of her crib eventually lulled her to sleep, but the weight in her chest remained. The next few months were different for her. It felt like she had finally moved past the denial and disbelief and was inching her way toward acceptance. Of course, such acceptance started with family. Despite the terror of being thrust into a strange, imaginary world, she couldn't deny how well the family cared for Kimiko, or rather, her. So she made an effort to actually learn more about them. Granted, she was not even a year old, so she couldn't ask the questions she wanted answers to, even if she tried. It was physically impossible for her underdeveloped tongue to form words. So she learned the only way she could, through observation. The Yuhi household was made up of 4 people. Kimiko, or her mother Kaori, her sister Kurenai, and their father, Shinku. Both Shinku and Kurenai were shinobi. Their father was a highly placed jonin in Konohagakure's hierarchy, and from what she could gather from conversations he shared with his wife and daughter, he was some sort of head instructor for the genin and chunin of Konoha. His work frequently kept him out of the house, but usually within Konoha's walls, something her mother was thankful for. Her older sister Kurenai, meanwhile, was a field chunin frequently deployed outside of Konoha. Between missions with her team, she visited whenever she could, always bringing stories of the world beyond Konoha's walls. The girl probably thought Kimiko couldn't make sense of most of them, but the way Kurenai's eyes lit up when she spoke made her presence feel like a rare, cherished gift. As if her sister actually looked forward to spending time with an infant who couldn't talk back. As if carving time to be with her sister wasn't out of obligation but genuine affection. She paid attention during the rare moments they were together as a complete family, listening to their conversations about the world beyond their home. One such conversation actually gave her context as to what was happening in the wider world. "War's just about over," said her father after finishing his bowl of rice and fish heads. Her mother, Kaori, didn't say anything, as busy as she was trying to feed Kimiko. Her sister was the one to respond. "Kumogakure and Kirigakure have already signed the armistice," she said, piercing a fish head with the tip of her chopsticks. "So has Iwa. The Tsuchikage has no choice but to sign, especially after Hokage-sama single-handedly stopped their last, desperate attempt to restart the war." There was admiration in her tone, something Kimiko noted with interest. 8,000 Iwa nin, killed by one man. Kimiko wasn't sure what to feel about a teenage girl admiring the slaughter of 1,000 people. Her father made a sound of agreement, nodding his head. The Hokage is wise and strong, given his youth. He told all the Jonin that he intends to put Konoha on the path to prosperity and peaceful coexistence with the other villages. And to do that, he says we need to rebuild what was lost during the war. Her father paused, letting a small smile spread across his face. He will be a fine Hokage who will make a peaceful and strong Konoha. The next generation can rest easy knowing such a reliable man is leading them. Her father's sage words earned smiles from Kaori and Kurenai, but Kimiko couldn't help the pang of helplessness that settled in her chest. It reminded her that as much as she found comfort in Kaori's warmth, Kurenai's sisterly love, and Shinku's protective presence, the knowledge of what loomed ahead sat like a stone in her stomach. Each smile and laugh from her family felt like a countdown, an unbearable reminder of how fragile these moments were. It seemed that the process of rebuilding didn't exactly mean her father and sister had more free time. Quite the opposite. Rebuilding meant more administrative and organizational work, which kept her father out of the house and in the academy for entire stretches of days. Meanwhile, her sister was taking missions with her team in far-flung areas, no doubt to gather funds needed for rebuilding, or so Kimiko concluded. This left the house mostly empty, save for her and her mother, Kaori. Because of that, she spent a lot of time getting to know her mother. Kaori wasn't a ninja. She wasn't a housewife who retired from being a ninja, like Kushina. No, she was never a shinobi in the first place. And yet, despite that, she ruled both her husband and daughter whenever they were in the house. In her home, they weren't shinobi, they were her family, and they followed her rules. Especially her father, who seemed to defer to her in all family matters. There was a certain strength to her mother. Not the sort of strength Kimiko remembered from figures like Tsunade or Sakura, but a different sort. Strength born of grace and refinement. She reminded Kimiko of a wildflower, beautiful, yet surviving. Not fragile, but resilient. Kaori's strength wasn't loud or flashy, it was in her quiet authority, the way her words shaped the household with no need for arguments or raised voices. It was a kind of power Kimiko had never associated with shinobi but found equally admirable. The time spent with her mother, while not doing much to sat her curiosity, was nonetheless something Kimiko enjoyed. Kaori frequently kept her close, carrying her to their wide-spanning garden of roses, letting her watch from her mobile stroller while her mother pruned the shrubs to perfection. Kaori picked the most vividly perfect roses Kimiko had ever seen, past life included. Kaori also made it a habit to bring her out of the house whenever she ran errands. These outings gave Kimiko a chance to see Konoha for the first time. It wasn't what she had expected. When someone mentioned Konoha, she had envisioned a vibrant little village nestled in the middle of a deep forest, with the Hokage mountain standing tall and proud in the background. A quaint settlement, perhaps bustling, but simple. And in part, that was true. But it was also so much more. The village may have started out as a small settlement, but Konoha had grown into something closer to a sprawling town or small city. It buzzed with life, a vibrant blend of eras and cultures. Edo-style wooden buildings lined the streets, their facades contrasting with stalls lit by electric lamps. Shops sold everything from antique weapons to steaming bowls of ramen. Some streets felt like they belonged in a feudal period, while others reminded her of modern Shinjuku. It was surreal. Like walking through an amusement park where the performers never took off their costumes or broke character. And yet, somehow, it all worked. For the first time since her arrival, Kimiko felt something that wasn't morose resignation or heavy apprehension. She felt a flicker of awe. This wasn't just an imaginary world, it was alive, bustling, and beautiful in ways she hadn't expected. And she actually wanted to see more of it. The days spent outside the house quickly became her favorite. Whether accompanying her mother to Konoha's wet market or the quaint tea house and inn near the village center, she relished every chance to explore. The tea house, seemingly owned by her family, became a familiar stop. Upon Kaori's arrival, the staff would bow deeply and address her as Kaori-sama. It wasn't just respect, it was reverence, the kind given to someone who commanded authority with poise. From her stroller, Kimiko watched her mother move through the tea house with effortless precision. Kaori issued instructions to the staff, corrected their work when necessary, and praised them when they met her exacting standards. Her tone was never harsh, but her words carried weight. No one questioned her, they simply obeyed. It fascinated Kimiko. Kaori wasn't just a mother or wife, she was a leader. A shrewd businesswoman who managed the tea house with the same grace and efficiency she brought to their home. How was such an impressive woman not given the time of day in Naruto? Kimiko wondered. The series she remembered focused so much on shinobi that people like Kaori, those who kept the village running, were invisible. It felt unfair, but it also made her realize how much she had overlooked. The tea house itself was enchanting. The air was warm and fragrant, steeped in the aroma of brewing tea and freshly baked pastries. Low tables sat neatly on tatami mats, and the murmur of soft voices created a serene backdrop. Kaori moved through it all like she belonged, not just in the tea house, but in every role she carried: mother, wife, leader. Kimiko watched her mother's interactions with growing admiration. A seed of curiosity took root within her. How had Kaori become this person? And what might she, Kimiko, learn from her in the years to come? One afternoon, during one of these outings, they encountered a family that stopped Kimiko in her tracks, figuratively speaking. "Kaori-san," came a low alto voice. Even Kimiko turned at the sound, her infant neck wobbling awkwardly. The speaker was a willowy woman with dark eyes and long black hair. She held a swaddled infant in one arm while her other hand gently gripped the small hand of a young boy who stood at her side. "Ah, Makoto-san, and I see you brought young Itachi with you," Kaori greeted warmly. Kimiko's thoughts screeched to a halt. Itachi Uchiha. Even someone with only passing knowledge of Naruto would recognize his story: the loyal son turned pariah, the child who sacrificed everything for his village only to be hated by those he protected. But, perhaps more importantly, someone who willingly took the burden of his entire clan on his shoulder. He did all of this without growing bitter against the village. A dutiful man. A complicated man, but one would not call him unwilling to fulfill his oath as a Konoha nen. However, this meant the baby Makoto held was. "Yes, and I brought Sasuke along, too," Makoto said, her voice warm with maternal pride. Kaori leaned in to coo over the baby, while the young Itachi approached Kimiko's stroller. His somber eyes flicked down to meet hers, and for a moment, she saw nothing but the innocence of a 6-year-old boy. A child who had no idea of the impossible choices he would soon face. Of the pain he was going to bear because of his love for the village. When he hesitated, his hand hovering near her, Kimiko reached out with her stubby arms and grasped his index finger. She cooed, drool pooling on her chin, but the briefest smile cracked Itachi's lips. "Oh? It seems Kimiko likes you, Itachi," Kaori said, her voice filled with fond amusement. Makoto smiled, too, her eyes softening as she watched the exchange. "She's very friendly," Itachi said quietly, sparing her another glance before looking up at his mother. "Well, Kimiko will be one of your brother's classmates, Itachi," Makoto said, brushing a hand over his hair. "Make sure to guide her as her senior." Kaori's expression flickered for the briefest moment, a shadow of worry crossing her face. Kimiko caught it. The same look her mother wore when they hadn't heard from Kurenai in days, or when Shinku announced he'd be spending another night at the academy. "Yes, you're starting the academy next year, right, Itachi?" Kaori asked, her tone smooth and practiced. "Yes, Kaori-sama," Itachi said formally, his small voice carrying a rehearsed tone. "I hope to bring honor to the Uchiha clan." Kaori's expression softened, her lips curling into a warm smile. "Such a dutiful young man. I'm sure you'll prove to be your father's equal." The two women shared more words, but it wasn't long before Makoto excused herself and her family. Itachi gave Kimiko one last look before taking his mother's hand and walking away. Kimiko exhaled silently. Well, at least she didn't cry or pass out this time. The rest of her time was spent productively, at least for a baby. When your body finally started keeping pace with your mind, development was laughably easy. In the weeks following the tea house encounter, Kimiko began showing off her growing skills to her family. She rolled onto her tummy and back again, giggled at everything they said, and even started responding when they called her name. Standing up took a bit more effort, requiring her to cling to furniture for support, but her family was no less impressed. "Genius," Shinku declared one evening, puffing out his chest. "She'll make Jonin younger than even the fourth Hokage." Kurenai giggled at his theatrics, while Kaori's lips tightened into a subtle, less enthusiastic smile. "You said the same thing about Kurenai," Kaori teased, earning a playful pout from her husband. "Yes, and I wasn't wrong. She's an outstanding kunoichi, isn't she? Beautiful like her mother, strong like her father." Shinku retorted, his tone carrying genuine pride. Kurenai's cheeks reddened slightly at the praise, though she tried to brush it off. "Kimiko's still a baby. Let's not give her a superiority complex before she can even walk." Kimiko, meanwhile, made a show of clapping her hands, as if cheering for herself. It earned a round of laughter from her family, and she felt a twinge of satisfaction. Making them happy, even in small ways, made her feel anchored. Like maybe, just maybe, she could belong here. It was also around this time that she began noticing something different. Something she'd never experienced in her previous life. At first, it was faint, like an itch just under her skin. But as days turned into weeks, the sensation grew stronger and more pronounced, until it was all but impossible to ignore. It felt like an invisible thread started at her navel and wove its way through her body, tangible yet ethereal. She didn't know what it was, but she instinctively tried to reach for it. She focused, flexing whatever internal muscle seemed tied to the sensation, and felt a faint hum in response. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was there. The mystery was solved one evening when Kimiko was playing with her rattle in her crib while Kaori prepared dinner in the kitchen. Suddenly, the door to her nursery slammed open, the noise jolting Kimiko and filling the room with a sharp gust of air. Kurenai stood in the doorway, kunai drawn, her crimson eyes scanning the room with a ferocity that made Kimiko's tiny body tremble. The shock of the intent of her sister to do harm, even if not directed to her, was overwhelming. It didn't take long till her lip quivered, and tears burst forth as she wailed. "What has gotten into you?" Kaori demanded sharply, marching into the room. She scooped Kimiko into her arms, cradling her protectively. As Kaori soothed her, Kimiko's cries gradually subsided into hiccuping whimpers. "Why did you burst into your sister's room armed with a kunai?" Kaori asked after she set Kimiko down on the crib, turning around and fixing Kurenai with a pointed look. Her voice was calm, but the disapproval was palpable. A lady like Kaori did not need to raise her voice to make her disapproval known. Kurenai sheathed her weapon, bowing her head slightly, though her body remained tense. "I sensed unfamiliar chakra in the room," she explained. "I thought there was an intruder. But," she frowned, "it disappeared as soon as I entered." Kaori's expression hardened. "Well, you must have been mistaken, Kurenai. The fourth Hokage and your colleagues would never allow a stranger to infiltrate this deeply into the residential districts." "Forgive me, mother," Kurenai said, though she didn't sound entirely convinced. "But I'm not so incompetent as to misidentify something this basic. I'm an adept sensor, and I felt an unfamiliar chakra signature in this room." Kaori opened her mouth to reply but paused, her gaze narrowing as realization dawned on her. Without another word, Kurenai stepped forward, placing 2 fingers on Kimiko's chest. Her other hand formed a single hand sign. Kimiko flinched as a gentle jolt coursed through her body. It wasn't painful, but it tickled, like a feather brushing against her veins. She blinked up at her sister, her earlier whimpering now replaced by curious coos. Kurenai's hands trembled slightly as she pulled back. Her sharp gaze softened, replaced by something warmer, pride, perhaps, or awe. "She really is full of surprises," Kurenai murmured, more to herself than to her mother. Kaori's lips tightened into a thin line, her eyes fixed on her elder daughter. "What do you mean, Kurenai?" Kurenai hesitated, as if debating how best to frame her response. Finally, she straightened her posture and spoke with quiet conviction. "It seems that Kimiko has managed to awaken her chakra." "Oh no." Kimiko laid on her back in a comfortable crib meant for infants, surrounded by a ring of indecipherable characters drawn in precise ink. The circle of symbols glowed faintly with a sea-green light as they spun in a rhythmic, soothing pattern. For the first time, she was witnessing ninjutsu up close. Sure, she'd caught glimpses of shinobi techniques before, Konoha-nin vanishing in puffs of white smoke during her trips with her mother, or the sparring matches between her father and sister. But one couldn't really appreciate ninjutsu till they saw it up close, or when it was directed to them. The technique's energy washed over her like a gentle wave, calming yet brimming with power. "Well," said the elderly woman leaning over her, her hand glowing with the same sea-green hue as the circle. Kimiko recognized her, Bawako, the third Hokage's wife, who had visited the Yuhi household shortly after Kimiko's birth. "It seems your daughter was right, Kaori-san. Kimiko has a fully functional and developed chakra pathway. And at such a young age." The glow faded from Bawako's hand, and the inked characters stopped spinning, their light extinguishing. Kimiko felt the soothing sensation dissipate, leaving only a residual warmth in its place. Kaori, who had been sitting nearby with her hands tightly clasped, frowned slightly. And, will it interfere with her growth and development, Bawako-sama? Her voice was calm, but Kimiko could sense the worry threaded beneath it. Bawako's brows furrowed at Kaori's reaction, though her tone remained kind. Interfere? She paused, giving Kaori a measured look. In a manner of speaking, yes. It will enhance her growth, making her healthier and more resilient than other children her age. Illness save for the most severe will scarcely touch her. If anything, it's a blessing. She leaned back in her chair, folding her hands together. Clan leaders of the oldest shinobi families would give anything for such good fortune, Kaori-san. It has been years since I've seen this, since. She hesitated, as if weighing her next words. The Yondaime? Kaori finished softly, her voice tinged with reluctance. Bawako inclined her head in agreement. Yes. Kaori's lips tightened, the faint frown never leaving her face. Kimiko, observing the exchange from her crib, couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt. It was clear her mother wasn't thrilled by the revelation. Even if Bawako's words were meant to reassure, Kaori's unease was palpable. There was a long, heavy silence before Bawako finally spoke again. Kaori-san? It's been more than 2 decades since you left the Fire Daimyo's court and began your life here in Konoha. You've raised an older daughter who serves this village with distinction. Why, then, do you still flinch when fate blesses your family? Her tone wasn't accusatory, far from it. It was the voice of an older sister speaking gently to a younger one, coaxing her to share what weighed on her heart. Kaori hesitated, her hands folding in her lap as she searched for the right words. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft, yet heavy with emotion. Bawako-san, the court of the Fire Daimyo had its own dangers. Hidden knives behind veils of silk, venomous words spoken through feigned smiles. But sending my children into battle? Allowing them to be shaped into weapons wielded by bureaucrats and merchants? There are nights when I think of writing to my brother, asking him to take Kimiko to the capital. It would only take a letter. He has love for me yet. She would have every luxury, every protection. She would be safe. Kaori's voice wavered, but she drew in a breath and straightened. But Shinku and Kurenai would never forgive me. They would see it as a betrayal, of their trust and of the village. Kimiko's heart ached for the woman who had become her mother. Kaori's love was a quiet, steady force, but it was clear she carried the weight of her sacrifices heavily. Kimiko had a mother in her past life, and she recognized the same fierce, protective instinct here. The kind that made Kaori see dangers no one else could. It made her wonder about her own situation. Would she learn to forget about her old life, about all the things she took for granted when she inevitably started the rest of her life as Kimiko Yuhi? Or would she forever compare the life she had now to that she had before, forever sticking out like a sore thumb in this world that she knew was created from the figment of a person's imagination? It wasn't something she wanted to dwell on. Bawako rose from her seat, her expression soft yet resolute. She stepped closer, placing a firm but gentle hand on Kaori's shoulder. Kaori-san, I understand your fears. I have 2 children of my own. When they first wore the Konoha headband, I wept. I wept because I could no longer shield them from the world, and because I knew they had taken their first steps toward fulfilling their duty. Kaori looked up, her lips pressed into a thin line. We are mothers, Bawako continued, her voice carrying the weight of experience. Our love makes us strong, but it also binds us to fears we cannot escape. Yet our role is not to shelter them forever. Nor is it possible to. Danger will find them whether they be in Konoha or the capital. Kimiko watched as her mother's resolve faltered, her hands trembling slightly. Bawako reached out, gently taking Kaori's hands in her own. Our role is to give them the strength to face the world and the knowledge that no matter what happens, they will always have a home to return to. Bawako's words were firm, supported by the weight of both motherhood and the decades she spent as a shinobi. Take solace in this, Bawako said, letting go of her mother's hand. In their chosen path, Kurenai and Kimiko will not walk alone. Every mother in Konoha will treat them as her own. They will be loved and protected as fiercely as you love and protect them. And you, in turn, will offer the same to the children they bring into your home. Kaori's shoulders sagged as the weight of Bawako's words settled over her. For a moment, the room was silent, save for the soft rustle of fabric as Kimiko shifted in her crib. Kimiko's thoughts swirled as she watched the exchange. Bawako's conviction, her unwavering belief in the bonds that held Konoha together, was unlike anything Kimiko had experienced in her past life. It was comforting, in a way, to know that even in a world fraught with danger, there was this sense of community, of shared responsibility. And that Bawako exemplified and believed in it with a quiet fervor. Is this what makes a shinobi, a shinobi? Their powerful convictions? She wondered, her eyelids growing heavy as exhaustion crept in. Kaori's voice, soft and steady, reached her ears as she drifted off. Thank you, Bawako-sama. I will consider your words. Kimiko's last thought before sleep claimed her was a simple one. No matter what the future held, she wasn't alone. She had her father, her mother, her sister Kurenai, and Konoha. She will be safe here, Shinku, Bawako said in her usual calm, reassuring tone. It is not every day that a child shows up in Konoha having a fully developed chakra pathway. Having her here will allow our medical nin to observe her closely. It will give Konoha's new generation the opportunity to study a medical miracle. Kimiko blinked up at them, her small fingers curling around the blanket as she took in the conversation. Bawako noticed her stirring and glanced her way, offering a warm smile. Shinku nodded quickly, his expression serious but hopeful. Bawako-sama will not let anything happen to our child, he said firmly, his voice carrying an almost unshakable belief in the experienced medical nin's capabilities. Kaori, however, remained quiet, her lips pressed into a thin line. Her gaze flickered between Bawako and Kimiko, and though her stance was composed, her hesitation was palpable. I understand what you're saying, Bawako-sama, she began, her voice soft but tinged with unease. But Kimiko is so young. What if she grows restless? What if the unfamiliar environment unsettles her? It will only be for a week, Bawako replied gently, picking up on Kaori's concern. And during that time, the Yuhi family may visit her as often as they wish. I will personally oversee her care, Kaori-san. Kaori exhaled slowly, her hands tightening briefly around Shinku's. She still didn't look entirely convinced. Very well, she said after a long pause, her tone quiet and measured. I know when I am defeated. You may have my daughter for your study, Bawako-sama. But I will fetch her myself at the week's end. Shinku, sensing the moment had passed, puffed out his chest and let out a booming laugh. Not even a year old and already providing a valuable service to Konoha. She'll be the first ever female Hokage, mark my words. Bawako chuckled softly, the tension in the room easing. Such ambition, Shinku. Perhaps she'll exceed even that if she takes after Kaori-san. Kaori allowed a faint smile to touch her lips, though her eyes lingered on Kimiko, who lay quietly in her crib, observing the adults with a mix of curiosity and trepidation. Kimiko will do fine, Bawako said with certainty, glancing back at the baby. Her chakra awakening is remarkable, yes, but it is not something to fear. It is an opportunity, for her and for us. Kaori nodded slowly, though her worry was still visible in the subtle tightness of her jaw. Please take good care of her, Bawako-sama. Bawako smiled warmly. She will be in excellent care, Kaori-san. This, I swear. Kimiko could only coo in agreement. Kimiko was thankful her mother allowed her to be used as a study subject. Mostly because it allowed her to do the thing she loved doing most. Trying to make sense of this world. After the second day, Kimiko understood the routine she was placed through. She'd be put in the nursery whenever it was time for bed, and at the break of dawn, she'd be taken by Bawako-sama into a dark observation room, where she'd be gently placed on an infant bed that had intricate arrays of characters written on its surface. And then, Bawako would run through hand seals which made the array of characters move and spin around her bed, before emitting a dome of light that struck the roof and illuminated her like a bright spotlight that didn't sear her eyes. Bawako-sama would then start her lessons whilst rows of medical nin, separated from her and Bawako by a glass screen, would start taking notes. After an hour or so, the students would depart, and Bawako herself would feed her and put her to sleep in the event that her family was too preoccupied to visit. Throughout the week, Kimiko would do her best to behave and cooperate. Which pleased Bawako and the other medical nin, with Bawako telling her colleagues that she was the most well-behaved baby she ever saw. Of course, Kimiko doubted that the other babies were actually grown women trapped in an infant's body, which gave her a very unfair advantage when it came to controlling her impulses, now that it was becoming easier and easier to control her reactions and her body. Of course, her pliant behavior was partially out of self-interest as well. As being an easy child meant that she could easily listen in to Bawako's lecture and learn a little bit about her situation. And it was enlightening, to say the very least. It turned out Bawako hadn't exaggerated when she called Kimiko a medical miracle. The term, awakening, one's chakra, as widespread as it was, didn't paint the full picture. Every person had chakra within them. It was just that most people didn't produce enough of it to be detectable, let alone usable. Shinobi, through centuries of study and practice, had unraveled the mechanics of chakra creation. They learned it was formed by the combination of two energies: physical energy, derived from the body's cells, and spiritual energy, believed to stem from the mind, or, if one was spiritual, the soul. When these two energies mixed, they created chakra. Through rigorous training, Shinobi discovered ways to refine both components. Physical energy could be increased through exercise and exertion, while meditation and mental exercises strengthened spiritual energy. Over time, clans and villages refined training regimens to optimize chakra production, enabling young shinobi to awaken their chakra at prepubescent ages. However, using chakra wasn't just about producing it. The body's chakra pathway system, networks of conduits often called meridians, had to mature enough to circulate chakra and allow it to be used. This usually happened between ages 5 and 6, coinciding with the start of academy training in Konoha. But, as Bawako explained in one of her lectures, there were rare exceptions. In Konoha, we have documented instances of early chakra pathway maturation. Individuals whose chakra pathways matured far earlier than normal. Bawako began, addressing a room of medical nin scribbling notes behind a glass partition. The first Hokage, Hashirama Senju, was said to have developed his chakra pathways so early that he started producing and circulating chakra in his mother's womb, and his chakra signature could be sensed before his birth. Though that may lean more toward folklore than fact. She paused, letting the room absorb her words. The Uchiha clan's leader during Konoha's founding, Madara Uchiha, reportedly achieved Jonin-level chakra reserves by the age of 6 due to this early maturation. Her tone softened as she continued. Orochimaru, one-third of the Sannin, exhibited robust chakra pathways by age 4. Kimiko almost flinched at that name. She knew that Orochimaru would likely leave the village in the near future after his experiments were discovered by the third Hokage. Just another thing you wouldn't be able to prevent. And, of course, the fourth Hokage himself, Bawako said with a trace of pride. His chakra was recognized by the late Mito Uzumaki before his first birthday. She looked directly at Kimiko, her stern expression softening into a smile. And now, we have another remarkable case, little Kimiko Yuhi. Barely months into her life, her chakra pathways have matured enough to circulate chakra, a feat few in history can claim. Kimiko responded with a toothless grin, earning a chuckle from Bawako. But the older woman's expression turned serious as she addressed the room again. Mind you, early chakra maturation is no guarantee of greatness. It provides a foundation, yes, a head start. But history has shown us that hard work and determination define a shinobi's success, not the circumstances of their birth. It is how one chooses to wield their gifts that truly matters. She absorbed more insights during Bawako's lectures, particularly the advantages of an early matured chakra pathway system. A key benefit was the assurance of having above-average chakra reserves. With more time to expand and refine their chakra compared to their peers, individuals like Kimiko could build a stronger foundation for ninjutsu and other shinobi arts. This development also opened the theoretical possibility of her starting the academy earlier than most. However, Kimiko doubted her mother would ever agree to such an idea, and she found herself inclined to agree. As fascinating as this world was, the thought of diving headfirst into Konohagakure's shinobi system, designed to mold children into warriors, made her stomach churn. She was still at an age where no one would bat an eye at her drinking from a feeding bottle. Why rush to trade her early childhood for weapons and missions? There was one detail about her that seemed to stump everyone: her chakra signature. It was distinctly different from that of her family, unrelated to Kurenai's, Shinku's, or even Kaori's. The medical nin suggested several theories, ranging from rare genetic anomalies to latent bloodline traits, but none fully explained the phenomenon. Kimiko, however, felt the answer lay in the unique circumstances of her existence. If one half of chakra was spiritual energy, born from the mind or, perhaps, the soul, then it made sense that hers would feel alien compared to her family's. After all, she wasn't truly born into this world. She was an already existing consciousness, transplanted into a body that wasn't originally hers. It wouldn't change anything about her day-to-day life, but it served as a stark reminder of her reality. She was a stranger in a borrowed life, a foreign soul in an unfamiliar world. As the week progressed, Kimiko felt like she learned a lot, but one thought truly imprinted itself within her mind: she was special. For the first time in both her lives, she felt exceptional. Not average, not just another person, but someone who could matter. The life she led before, it was an average life. The life of someone who was going to live and die without making their mark on the world. She wasn't poor, she wasn't rich, she wasn't ugly, nor was she overly attractive. She had partners, but she never married nor had kids. It was mediocre in every sense of the word. And she didn't particularly miss it. Sure, she reminisced about her life back on Earth, but when she actually took the time to observe, no one would miss her. Her parents might mourn her, as would her meager friends and siblings, but they'd eventually move on and forget about her given a few months if she were being generous. But here, it could, if you looked at life correctly, give her a clear shot at a life she could be proud of. Kimiko awoke on the morning of her final day at the hospital to Bawako's familiar voice echoing through the room. The older woman was speaking to the other medical nin, her tone firm but tinged with something uncharacteristically tense. "I'll be called away on urgent business today," Bawako explained, straightening her coat. "Shinku-san will collect Kimiko early this evening. Until then, ensure she's kept safe and continue monitoring her progress. No deviations." Kimiko, still groggy, blinked at Bawako's figure as she leaned over to check the seals on the crib. For a moment, their eyes met, and the older woman's expression softened. "You've been a star pupil, little one," she murmured. "We'll see each other soon." There was a weight to her words that made Kimiko's stomach churn. She'd come to understand Bawako as a steady, reassuring presence, but today, there was an edge to her demeanor. A subtle urgency that set Kimiko on edge. Still, there was little she could do but trust the woman's care and wait for her father to arrive. The day passed uneventfully, the routine as ordinary as ever. Kimiko had her morning observation, followed by Bawako's assistants checking her chakra levels and taking notes. She drifted in and out of naps, lulled by the quiet hum of hospital life. But when she awoke that evening, the world had turned into a nightmare. The sharp cries of infants shattered the air, blending with the frantic shouts of medical nin. Shadows danced erratically across the walls as lanterns flickered, casting the sterile white corridors in a chaotic haze of light and dark. The metallic tang of blood and antiseptic hung thick in the air, and the ground beneath her crib trembled with distant reverberations. Kimiko's eyes widened, her tiny body stiffening. What was happening? "The eastern wards are filling up. We need more beds cleared immediately," a voice barked from the hallway. "Deploy reinforcements to the south gate. The wounded are piling up there. They need help," another shouted, the words muffled but unmistakable. The nursery door slammed open, and a harried medic burst in, his eyes darting around before settling on Kimiko. "Move the infants to the western wing. It's the furthest from." He stopped short, his expression twisting in frustration as he muttered, "No time. Just keep them secure." Kimiko clutched at the edge of her blanket, her mind racing. Eastern wards? South gate? It didn't take much to piece together what little she could. Something massive, was attacking the village. But what? Her infant body couldn't stop trembling, though her mind fought to stay calm. What had enough power to threaten Konoha? To bring it to its knees? And then, it clicked in her head. But the moment she remembered what was happening, she felt her senses collapse in a vicious assault of stimuli that forced her to pay attention. She floated bodiless in the face of a sea of endless forests that stretched in every direction, beyond what any man would see. Below her, a city of wood and fire stood in the middle of the endless forests, resolute and quiet with strength. Beyond the city hovered a red-eyed, gargantuan monstrosity that took a vulpine shape. 9 flaming whips of vermilion fire and hatred hovered behind its bubbling maw, fit to swallow mountains. With each breath the creature took, rough winds that tore dozens of trees from the roots came from its snout and jaw. Paws the size of manners, with curved claws sharper than 100 steel blades planted itself on each side of the city as the creature of wrath threw its head back and opened its mouth, revealing an endless row of menacing and pitiless thorns of bristled steel which can cut through the finest armor. A sickening roar of burning fury and anguish flooded out from its maw, the sound of 10,000 tortured souls and a million gnashing teeth. The echoes of hell sundered fields, splintered trees and shattered mountains, yet the wooden city remained untouched as the Golden Prince rose from behind its walls to succor it with his light. A million characters of complex equations surrounding the city and muting the screams from beyond the walls. The prince, crowned with a molten circlet forged from golden sunlight, wielded a blade of radiant lightning and brilliant hope. With his hands stained crimson from unyielding sacrifice, he raised the shining blade high, his stance one of protective fury and righteous defiance. With one strike, the blade forged from lightning and hope parried the rending claws of the grotesque monstrosity with perfect precision, and with blinding speed did he riposte, the blade of hope and lightning tearing into the rotten flesh of the beast a dozen, 100, 1,000 times. Each blow he struck carved gouging wounds that bled a river of poisonous tar. And behind him, the sound of machineries clicking into place filled the forests, and 1,000 siege engines on the walls of the city of wood and fire took aim in impossible synchrony and fired upon the beast. The void of the dark forest was illuminated by 1,000 flaming comets that soared from the cities and sought purchase on the body of the beast. The beast howled as the endless volley struck its flesh, writhing in pain. Yet did the beast lash out in response. A million blades of different makes came pouring out of the beast's maw. Each blade gleamed with an edge that thirsted for blood. The barrage of sharp blades struck the prince and the city, and slightly did the prince's lights flicker under the assault. Yet the city of wood remained stalwart, and the prince remained resolute. Thrice more did they exchange fire, yet with each exchange, the prince yielded an inch to the beast, who gleefully advanced on him and the city. But stainless chains with links of pristine steel and salubrious compassion sailed across the forest and wrapped around the beast, embracing it in an inviolate vice. Struggle as he might, the beast failed to loosen the chains, powered as they were with the faith of those that came before and will come after, and for the briefest of moments did the prince and the city get their chance for reprieve. And in a snap, Kimiko found herself in the nursery again, the vivid and yet esoteric vision of the battle etching itself directly into her mind. The terrifying feeling pervaded her every thought, and only then did she realize the titanic scale of the battle that occurred, and just how helpless she was against it. She couldn't even find the power to cry, exhausted as she suddenly was just from perceiving the idea of the battle outside of the hospital walls. The door opened again, and a new figure entered, a young medic clutching a clipboard, her hands shaking as she approached Kimiko's crib. "We're moving you to the basement," she said softly, though her eyes betrayed the terror she was trying to mask. "You'll be safe there, little one," Kimiko whimpered, not from fear of the medic but from the overwhelming realization of her own helplessness. She could hear the chaos, feel the tremors, even understand the stakes, but she could do nothing. Nothing but be carried, moved, and hidden like a fragile object. The medic carefully scooped her up, cradling her against her chest as she hurried through the halls. Kimiko caught fleeting glimpses of the chaos outside the nursery. Bloodied shinobi being rushed on stretchers, children crying as they clung to panicked parents, and through a distant window, a fiery glow that lit the horizon like an ominous sunrise. The Nine Tails was still out there, wreaking havoc. She could feel its presence, even from here, a suffocating, oppressive weight that pressed down on her tiny body and made her breath hitch. You didn't need to be a censor or whatever it was called to feel its presence, as massive, powerful, and hideous as it was. As they descended into the lower levels of the hospital, the noise faded slightly, replaced by the hum of distant explosions and the occasional rumble of the ground. Several arrays of indecipherable characters were painted on the walls of the lower levels. They seemed to slightly shift and glow with different colors of lights with each explosion that rocked the room, but she felt as if she was safer here than she was above ground. Eventually, they entered an empty room and the medic placed Kimiko in a makeshift crib, her hands lingering for a moment as if reluctant to let go. "Stay safe, little one," she whispered before hurrying off to assist elsewhere. Kimiko lay still, her mind a whirlwind of thoughts. This was it, the night everything changed for Konoha. The night that would shape the lives of so many, Naruto, Kakashi, even her own family. She'd always known it was coming, but being here, experiencing it, was something else entirely. And despite knowing all about it, she was helpless. Helpless to tell Minato that his student was betraying him and getting him and his wife killed. Helpless in warning everyone what Danzo would do in the aftermath. Just useless. Did you honestly think it would go differently just because you exist? She closed her eyes, forcing herself to breathe steadily. There was nothing she could do now. She could only hope that Kimiko, that her family was safe, that Bawako's absence meant she was helping in some crucial way and she'd be out of harm's way, and that the village she was beginning to care for would endure the night. Kimiko wore a small black dress that day, matching her family's somber attire. Kurenai pushed her stroller as they made their way to the memorial grounds where the funerals for the deceased would be held. Funerals in Konoha were similar to those on Earth, or at least that's what Kimiko could surmise, albeit with a deeper, more communal grief. Every death felt like the loss of a family member, as tightly knit as the village was. And with the sheer devastation caused by the Nine-Tails attack, the entire community was shrouded in a collective cloud of bitter mourning and disappointment. Kimiko vividly remembered the aftermath of the attack. It was Kurenai who had come to fetch her from the hospital, and even then, the devastation was palpable. She had seen the sheer number of shinobi and civilians whose lives had been lost. Corpses were piled in the hospital morgue, and the medical nin left behind worked somberly to identify the dead, delivering the heart-wrenching news to surviving families. The sorrowful cries of grieving kin echoed through the halls, a haunting melody of loss that Kimiko could never forget. One of the bodies brought to the hospital was Bawako-sama's. The moment her death was confirmed, an even heavier pall fell over the hospital. Kurenai had to step outside to comfort a crying Asuma, while his father, Hiruzen Sarutobi, came to retrieve Bawako's body. Kimiko could only watch helplessly from her stroller, the weight of the scene pressing down on her small, powerless form. The days following the attack were no less grim. Although both Kaori and Shinku were largely unharmed, Shinku's minor injuries requiring little more than basic care. The weight of the village's collective grief was ever present in their household. Shinku's words over dinner rang in her mind. In Konoha, one loss impacts all, and so it is grieved by all. And they had lost so many. Countless Chunin and several Jonin had perished, including two of Shinku's batchmates, Akaku and Kohari. The attack left behind countless orphans, including a boy Kimiko recognized from her limited knowledge of this world. Iruka Amino, Akaku and Kohari's son. She knew how this tragedy would shape him, hardening him into someone who would one day become an influential figure for Naruto. Bawako-sama's death struck a critical blow to Konoha Hospital, effectively crippling the leadership of the medical corps. Yet no loss reverberated through the village like that of Minato Namikaze and Kushina Uzumaki. As Shinku had explained to Kaori, losing a cage was always devastating, but to lose one so soon after a world-spanning war placed Konoha in a precarious position. It was why the leadership acted swiftly, reinstating Hiruzen Sarutobi as Hokage rather than going through the lengthy process of selecting a new leader. Stability was paramount, and the reassurance of a proven leader was the best course of action. Hiruzen wasted no time implementing measures to secure the village's future. Chief among them was the decree forbidding discussion of the Nine-Tails and the attack. Though it wasn't explicitly stated, Kimiko understood that this decision was made to protect Naruto, the infant now carrying the burden of the Nine-Tails sealed within him. By taking the name Uzumaki, he would be shielded, at least on paper, from those who might seek to harm him, whether out of resentment for his parentage or hatred for the creature now bound to his soul. Kimiko couldn't fault Hiruzen for his decision. It was easy to pass judgment when one was removed from the consequences, behind a computer screen, but living within the reality of it. She believed the old man had done the best he could with an impossible hand. Even if Naruto's identity had been made public and the truth of his sacrifice known, she doubted the villagers would have hailed him as a hero. The will of fire might burn bright, but it wasn't enough to extinguish the ignorance and fear she knew would fester in the hearts of many. Some would fear Naruto, seeing only the monstrous entity sealed within him. Others would hate him, blaming him for the destruction wrought upon their village. And the cruelest among them might even see his survival as an insult, a poor trade for the lives of Minato and Kushina, two revered heroes. Kimiko's heart ached at the thought. She knew, better than anyone, the kind of lonely road Naruto would walk. As the family approached the memorial site, Kimiko's thoughts grew heavier. The monument loomed ahead, its black stone etched with the names of those who had fallen. People gathered in clusters, their faces pale and tear-streaked, clinging to each other for solace. The mournful sound of a ceremonial bell echoed through the air, punctuating the stillness with its haunting chime. Kurenai gently pushed Kimiko's stroller to the side, finding a quiet spot among the mourners. Kaori and Shinku stood close together, their hands clasped tightly. Shinku's normally cheerful demeanor was subdued, his shoulders weighed down by the gravity of the occasion. Kaori, ever poised, held herself together with a quiet strength, though Kimiko could see the faint tremor in her mother's hands. As the ceremony began, the presiding elder spoke of unity, resilience, and the enduring will of fire. His voice carried over the crowd, steady yet tinged with sorrow. Kimiko listened intently, her infant mind grappling with the enormity of the moment. This was a village united not just by tragedy, but by the shared determination to honor those they had lost by continuing to stand strong. Kimiko's gaze drifted to the faces around her. She saw grief, yes, but also resolve. These were people who had endured unimaginable loss and yet chose to carry on. It was a testament to the strength of Konoha's spirit, a reminder of the enduring bonds that held the village together. As the ceremony drew to a close, Kimiko felt a strange mix of emotions. Grief for those who had perished, gratitude for the family she still had, and an unshakable resolve to make the most of this second chance she had been given. This world was harsh, yes, but it was also filled with people who fought, loved, and grieved together. As they made their way home, Kimiko couldn't shake the spark ignited within her. It was faint but unmistakable, the same spark she saw in the eyes of every citizen of Konoha. The will to rebuild, to honor the memory of those they had lost. But as the spark flickered, so did a question, one she couldn't ignore. Was she truly content to remain helpless? She wasn't spiritual, nor had she ever believed in a higher power, but her circumstances defied all logic. What kind of god, or force, would have the cruelty and power to place her here, in an imagined world, instead of granting her rest in an afterlife? And for what purpose? Whether it was for some grand design or the god's own amusement, they hadn't sent her empty-handed. She was given gifts, a body destined to thrive in this world's brutal demands. Knowledge of events yet to unfold, enough to give her an edge most here could never dream of. These weren't coincidences, they were tools. Tools that could shape her fate. Despite the lingering echoes of her protests, she couldn't ignore the truth. She had the potential to make a difference. The grieving faces she saw today, the families clutching the weight of their loss, made her chest tighten. This wasn't the end of their pain, she knew what was coming. Wars, betrayals, tragedies that would shatter even the strongest hearts. Her hands clenched around the stroller's edge as the resolve took root. No, she couldn't save everyone. But that didn't mean she wouldn't try. If she had to bleed for this village, she would. If she could stop even one tear from falling, it would be worth it. For the first time since waking in this world, she felt a sense of purpose. She wasn't here to stand by idly. She was here to fight. The rest of her infancy went by like a breeze, and as she grew from infant to toddler, so did the things she was able to actually do. Her family was quite proud when she showed how quickly she learned how to do normal baby things. Before she was 2 years old, she already started speaking in complete thoughts and sentences. A mark of her genius, according to her father. Kimiko was just thankful that her unexplained ability to understand the language the people of Konoha spoke also extended to speech. She didn't have to learn to speak Japanese, because to her perception, they weren't speaking Japanese. They were speaking her mother tongue, which meant the moment she was physically able to talk, she could communicate the way she used to be able to in her past life. She reckoned that as cruel as the deity who put her in this anime world was, they at least ensured she wouldn't be defeated by her inability to learn Nihongo. However, such blessings didn't extend to her literacy, so she still couldn't read or write in the written language of the Narutoverse. Which, unfortunately for her, included 3 separate writing systems. All stupidly difficult to learn back on Earth: kanji, hiragana, and katakana. And, because she learned how to speak so early, her mother took that as an invitation to start teaching her how to read and write. After a day's worth of writing lessons with her mother, Kimiko wore a triumphant grin as she clutched a small sheet of paper filled with wobbly characters. Her mother's warm smile beamed down at her, pride radiating from Kaori as she gently corrected the curve of a stray kana with a guiding hand. Good job, Kimiko, Kaori said softly, her voice full of encouragement. Soon, you'll be writing like your sister. Kimiko didn't have the heart to tell her mother that her hand felt like it had been through a battlefield. Her fingers ached from gripping the brush, and the characters on the paper still looked more like mangled worms than elegant writing. Thanks, Mama, she said instead, trying to ignore the exhaustion that came from focusing so intently. The effort it took to mimic her mother's graceful strokes was almost insulting, given the mid-20s mind supposedly guiding her hand. Still, when Kaori placed the paper on the small family display shelf alongside Kurenai's childhood drawings, a flicker of pride warmed her chest. It wasn't about the aesthetics of the characters, it was about what they meant. Progress. It didn't come to her naturally. In fact, she felt as if she learned how to do it slower than other children her age did. However, she still picked it up quicker than she would have back on Earth. Maybe her mind still had some sort of neuroplasticity despite hosting a mid-20s presence within. Her musing was cut off when Kaori's voice came again. Tomorrow, we will work on your table manners and your everyday etiquette, Kimiko. Maybe we can start working on your ikebana. A lady must never be uneducated in these matters. You will thank me once you inevitably go to the capital for an event or so. You'll see? Kimiko took a deep breath and gave her mother a serene smile. Yes, Mama. Her father, Shinku, contributed to her development in his own way. Though he spent less time at home, with the third Hokage relying heavily on her father's support in the rebuilding of the academy and the revising of its educational system, he made sure to set aside time to guide her through basic chakra exercises. When Kimiko turned 3, he introduced her to simple activities that would help her become familiar with her own chakra. Nothing strenuous, just little practices to encourage her awareness of chakra. Kimiko, he'd say, sitting beside her with a leaf balanced on his palm. Feel the warmth in your body, like a small fire. Try to guide it, gently. Like this. He demonstrated, the leaf twitching ever so slightly before it stuck to his hand as though glued. Kimiko would try to imitate him, often ending with the leaf falling away. But Shinku never showed frustration. Instead, he praised her attempts, saying, even great shinobi start here. It seemed that Shinku's gentle teaching method worked extremely well with Kimiko, as it didn't take long for her to start succeeding in making the leaf stick to her palm not a week after she started the exercise. And when her sister, fresh from a mission, saw that Kimiko was effortlessly performing the exercises, she upped the ante. Take this, said Kurenai, handing her a white, crisp paper used for origami before stepping back. Let's see if you can make this stick to your hand, continued Kurenai. And then after you make it stick, make it fold into something simple. Like this. Kurenai opened her palm, where a piece of carnation-colored paper sat. And without moving even the tip of her finger, the paper started folding on itself, forming an intricate paper flower on the palm of her sister's hand. It's very unbecoming of a lady to show off, as excellent a task as she is. Sniffed Kimiko, causing Kurenai to laugh and ruffle her thick and curly black hair. You are our mother's daughter through and through, are you, Kimiko? Said Kurenai with a smile. The exercise was much harder for Kimiko to do. It wasn't just guiding your chakra to one place. It required you to actively manipulate it to perform a precise task. It didn't take a genius to deduce what the exercise was supposed to teach: chakra control. Guiding enough chakra to a certain point was one thing, but exerting fine-tuned control over it? That was something that went beyond simple chakra guidance. Pour too much chakra in, and the paper ripped. Too little, and it didn't even stick to her palm. The exercise required patience, deliberation, and precise control. However, it was fascinating. Something that couldn't have been done in her previous world, and the sheer curiosity she had regarding chakra and its use was enough to have Kimiko hyper-focusing on being able to perform the exercise her sister showed her. The sight of Kimiko with furrowed brows, 100 crumpled and ripped paper napkins around her, became a regular one in the Yuhi household. And then, one evening, it happened. Kimiko sat cross-legged on the floor, her brows furrowed in concentration. A red paper napkin, already slightly crumpled, rested on her small palm. Shinku sat beside her, quietly encouraging, while Kurenai leaned against the wall with a small smile. Remember, Shinku said gently. Guide your chakra like a thread, not a flood. Patience. Kimiko nodded, exhaling slowly. The warmth in her body gathered in her palm, a small yet steady stream of chakra flowing into the napkin. Slowly, deliberately, she willed the edges of the paper to lift. It began to fold. Once, twice, each crease sharp and clean. The napkin rose slightly, forming the first semblance of a crane. Her hands trembled, but she held her focus, guiding the last fold into place. When the napkin flower bloomed on her palm, wobbly yet whole, Shinku's face broke into a wide smile. Kurenai let out a demure, but no doubt impressed smile. "Well done, Kimiko." Shinku clapped her shoulder lightly, pride radiating from him. Kurenai crouched beside her, gently plucking the paper flower from her hand. "Not bad, little sister," she said, holding it up to inspect it. "A little rough around the edges, but for your first try? Pretty impressive. Keep on doing that whenever you're idle, it will help you out a lot in the academy, and even after." Kimiko stared at the crumpled little flower, her heart swelling with a mix of pride and relief. It wasn't perfect, but it was hers. A small victory, yet monumental in its significance. "Thank you," she murmured, her voice soft but sincere. A drop of her sweat trailed from her forehead and fell to the ground. As small as this step was, it was still something to celebrate. Her social life, or whatever you called her interaction with other kids, was an entirely different story though. The moment she reached 4 years old, her father insisted on making her play outside of their house with other kids to make friends. Unsurprisingly, Konoha's culture meant that the parents let their kids play on the streets for hours without supervision. And it made sense. Konoha did, on some level, believe that each clan and citizen was part of an extended family, and so not only helped in raising all of Konoha's children but also ensured their safety. It also helped that under Fugaku Uchiha's leadership of the Konoha police force, crime was practically non-existent in Konoha. But really, it didn't help her out all that much. She didn't exactly get along with other kids. It wasn't as if learning how to talk as eloquently as she could before her death in the real world helped her out with socializing with kids of the same age as her. In fact, it may have even hindered her progress, given that it had been so long since she was a toddler that she didn't know how to act like they did. And even if she tried to, it didn't come off as genuine. Children were surprisingly quick to pick up on whether someone was being true to themselves or not. Of course, being genuine and trying to talk to them as she usually would didn't help either, as doing so resulted in the kids either giving her a weird look or laughing at her because of how little she spoke or how formal she sounded, before leaving her on her own. The first time that happened, she decided to spend as little time as possible with other children her age. And it's not like she went out of her way to try and accommodate the kids, either. Honestly, there was some part of her that felt like time spent playing with them could be better spent elsewhere, like studying, or giving herself the best advantage possible before she started with the academy. It was a tad bit arrogant, but she had never been the sort to get along with kids back in her previous life, so trying to relate to them and spending an entire day with them when they were being petulantly cruel due to youth was a tall order for her. So, whenever her father told her to get out of the house, she usually made her way to the Konoha library instead. The Konoha library became a second home to her, and it felt cathartic, seeing all the available information right at her fingertips. The librarian, a retired chunin named Guro Hanawa, was surprised at first to see a 4-year-old girl trying to ask him for a library card, but as the days became weeks and weeks became months, and she kept on returning to the library to spend entire days reading, she and the librarian became closely acquainted with each other. "You again, little one?" Guro Hanawa chuckled, adjusting his spectacles as he leaned over the counter. "Haven't read through the whole library yet, have you?" Kimiko shook her head, cradling a dusty tome nearly her size. "Not yet, but I'm working on it." Guro snorted, pulling out her usual seat by the window. "At this rate, I'll have to start writing new books just to keep up." Kimiko grinned faintly, settling into her chair. She loved the quiet humor of the old man and how he didn't treat her like a child. It made the library feel even more like a sanctuary. She wanted to understand more about the world she found herself in, things that Kishimoto didn't discuss because he didn't think it was necessary to do so in a shonen manga with a focus on battles and action sequences, but were essential to know if you were going to actually live in that world. Things like a detailed history of the wider shinobi world, chakra theory, economics, and many other subjects. Kimiko spent most of her time reading these textbooks, and after a while, the librarian started letting her bring these books back home, where she read them cover to cover and made her own notes in her journal about things she learned about the world. So for a while, that was her everyday routine. Morning exercises with her father and sister, which she deduced was a way to prepare her for taijutsu training, before leaving the house to go to the library and spend all her time reading about this world she was in. And the longer she studied, the more she realized the reality that Konoha was still a military city, and they were still in a semi-feudal country ruled by a feudal overlord. Though most of Konoha was thankfully literate, she found that most information she could read about shinobi history in the library was heavily propagandized. Stories that framed terrible acts of war Konoha engaged in as justified or heroic, and it reminded her just how different the values she grew up with were compared to the people of this world. Her little routine didn't go unnoticed forever, and she was forced to speak about her situation to her mother one day when she took her to their family's tea house. "Kimiko," said Kaori as she ran her ivory comb through Kimiko's long, curly black hair. "The librarian spoke to me yesterday." There was no hint of anger or irritation in the woman's voice, but Kimiko knew the jig was up, anyway. "I have been spending more time in the library than I have been honest about, mother," said Kimiko. Your daughter can only apologize for her lies. Speaking in such verbose ways came naturally to her now, given the years she spent being raised by Kaori. "It's good that you don't attempt to cover up a lie with another one," said Kaori idly. "But I can hardly be displeased that my youngest daughter is both curious and studious when other parents pray for their child to be more like you." She continued to comb her hair, and Kimiko had to admire how soft the woman's hands were. "I would nonetheless like to know why you thought to conceal your activities from us," Kaori asked expectantly. Kimiko had to close her eyes. How could she tell her mother that she thought she was better than the other kids, so she'd much rather learn than pretend to be ninjas? "I was worried you and father would disapprove, mother," Kimiko spoke. "That I find books in the library better company than children my age." A small frown crossed Kimiko's lips. "And they didn't seem to be interested in being friends with me," she admitted. "They seem to look at me like I'm something to laugh at and make jokes about, not a playmate, definitely not a friend." She didn't notice the way her hands balled into fists, clutching her skirt, her head hanging down. Was she this upset about it, and why did she notice it just now? The comb halted, and the next thing she knew, Kaori held her by the shoulder and turned her around, letting her see her mother's kindly features and the concerned frown that was now on her lips. "Oh, Kimiko, you should have told me or your father, we didn't expect that the children would." The frown on her mother's face deepened, but she placed a hand on Kimiko's chin, angling her head up so that Kimiko's eyes met hers. "You're a gifted child, Kimiko. Your father is right about that," Kaori said softly. "The other children, they're just young. They don't know how to handle someone so different." Kaori's tone was gentle but firm, as if she truly believed her words. "But when they're older, they'll see just how wrong they were for treating you as they did." She ran a thumb across Kimiko's cheeks to wipe the falling tears. "But, you must remember, Kimiko. You will grow up to be an exceptional woman, regardless of what you choose to do. But no person, no matter how great, can stand on their own. It will be difficult, especially at first, but you must have people beside you aside from your family." A smile crossed her mother's lips. "Friends who stand by your side and whose honor you'll defend just as fiercely. The ones you trust completely, they'll be the ones who stay with you for life." Kaori dismissed her to bed not long after, and they never spoke of that little incident again. Neither Shinku nor Kurenai spoke about it either. Kimiko also noticed that they stopped asking her where she was going whenever she left the house, so she had a feeling her mother had a conversation with the two about the situation she was in. She wanted to believe in her mother's words, that in the future, it'd be less difficult for her to fit in this world she found herself in. She'd actually start to speak to people her age, and she wouldn't feel like she's being forced to hang out with children. That she would start to make friends. But only time will tell. The world of shinobi did not stop spinning outside. On the contrary, it seemed that when you're actually living in the world, certain events happened quicker than you thought they did. "What can you say about the current tension surrounding the council and the Uchiha?" Shinku asked his sister one afternoon, his gaze fixed on the horizon beyond the garden. Beside him, Kurenai paused mid-sip of her tea, her expression thoughtful. Kimiko, meanwhile, was too focused on trimming the rose shrubs in their family's garden. "There are members of the Uchiha clan who feel slighted by the village leadership because of recent events," Kurenai began. It started with Fugaku-sama's non-inclusion for the role of 4th Hokage. Some of the Uchiha saw it as a deliberate slight. And when they were barred from fighting the Nine Tails, it only fueled their belief that Konoha would rather risk destruction than trust their clan. Kimiko listened intently, her small hands deftly trimming a particularly stubborn branch. The mention of the Uchiha made her pause. She knew how their story would end, and how soon. As essential as they are, their relationship with the council and the people has always been adversarial because of the role they perform for Konoha. Shinku said dryly, "Law enforcers are rarely beloved by the people they monitor, and the Uchiha are no exception." Her father made a humming sound before continuing to speak. The Uchiha are right, in a sense. The council, or rather, Danzo Shimura, made the decision to keep them away from the battle against the Kyuubi, and told them to focus on protecting the citizens of Konoha instead, said Shinku, slowly. Danzo-san, for all the love he bears for the village, can never be described as an honest man. He is the sort who believes that honesty makes for a poor shinobi. Oh? Kurenai leaned forward, intrigued. He is one of the Uchiha's biggest detractors, seeing the Uchiha as not being wholly loyal to Konoha the same way he and his clan is, said Shinku, and even without looking back, Kimiko felt the frown in her father's voice. And when he saw the opportunity to sow seeds of distrust against the Uchiha, he took it. By keeping the Uchiha away from the Nine Tails, he made it easier for others to question their loyalty. This growing resentment against the Uchiha allows him the political capital and council support to ostracize the Uchiha even more, which is why the Hokage was forced to accept his recent proposal, as offensive as it is to one of Konoha's greatest and most noble clans. Kimiko's fingers tightened on the shears. Danzo's actions, calculated as they were, had the air of inevitability. She knew where this would lead: the massacre, the grief, the bitter cycle of violence. The future loomed like a dark cloud she couldn't dispel. Fugaku-sama has shown displeasure with the council's decision to relocate his clan to the village's outskirts, where they driven further away from the heart of Konoha, said Kurenai slowly. He feels as if the council is overreaching and giving deliberate offense to his clan, hiding behind the pretense of reconstruction, in order to force them to comply to what they see as targeted and tyrannical ordinances meant to curtail his clan's influence and power in Konoha. Wicked Eye had always been dutiful, his loyalty to the village unquestioned. He never paid any mind to his clan's malcontents who speak of the village conspiring against them, said Shinku, and as Kimiko turned to trim the bush the other way, she caught sight of the man, who met her eyes and gave her an encouraging smile. It is concerning that he is seemingly starting to see the situation as these people do. A tight frown formed on his aging father's lips. Father, if what you said is true, said Kurenai, then by doing this, Fugaku-sama is falling directly into Danzo Shimura's hands. He wants his Fugaku to start refusing to cooperate with Konoha, as it will give him and the council a justifiable excuse to crack down on the Uchiha even harder. Indeed, said her father with an oddly grim tone. And did you hear from your teammate Asuma what the third intends to do with the Uchiha situation before it escalates more than it already has? I have, said Kurenai. The third plans on speaking with Fugaku and his supporters behind closed doors, in an effort to mediate. I feel like it will be useless, though, admitted Kurenai. Mediation only works if both sides are willing. And the Uchiha? The Uchiha holds grudges like no other clan do. She sighed, sounding resigned. Her father made a sound of agreement. I agree. Still, Shinku said, shaking his head, not all matters in Konoha are as grim. Speaking of important decisions, I heard from Lord Third that Asuma has received an invitation to join the 12 Guardian Ninja from the Fire Daimyo himself, her father sniffed. A great honor for any Konoha nin to receive. Has he told you whether he would accept? Kurenai stiffened, her face tight. If he has, it's his choice to make, and it is not something I would discuss with you, father. Kimiko glanced over her shoulder just in time to see Shinku chuckling. What happened to the manners and etiquette your mother took the time to teach you? Huffed Shinku. Becoming one of the 12 Guardian Ninja is an honorable role for any Konoha nin, especially a new Jonin. It will allow him to gain some experience navigating the politics that comes with being a Jonin of Konoha. He paused for a brief moment. The daimyo's courtiers do enjoy their courtly intrigues. Konoha needs their shinobi closer to home, now more than ever. What he'll learn in the capital pales in comparison to the service he can render here, to the village, said Kurenai. Though Kimiko could hear from her tone that even she saw the wisdom in their father's words. A small smile crossed Shinku's lips as he continued speaking, making no attempts to refute his daughter, nor even acknowledge them. When I took that post, I was fortunate enough to have met your mother. I still remember how we met then, when she, surrounded by a gaggle of giggling handmaidens, approached me, trying to ask for stories about shinobi and the war that raged outside the capital's walls. And you plucked that blushing flower out of the daimyo's garden and brought it with you to Konoha, said Kurenai dryly. Ho, is that why you're worried about Asuma leaving, Kurenai? Afraid he'll pluck a pretty flower from your uncle's court like your father did? Father. Kurenai's scandalized tone drew laughter from Shinku, the tension in the air momentarily dispelled. Kimiko returned to her task, a small smile tugging at her lips. Even amidst the looming shadows of politics and personal decisions, her family remained a source of warmth. But the world beyond their garden was moving too fast. The Uchiha, Asuma, the endless machinations of those in power. It was a reminder that time was slipping through her fingers. If she wanted to keep her promise, she would have to act, and soon. Thankfully, she didn't have to wait long. Her days as a carefree child without responsibilities were over, as one day, her father came to tell her that the time had come for her to start her education as a shinobi in the academy. She always flinched whenever her mother brought up the possibility of having her go to one of the civilian schools in Konoha, or even Minzoku, the most prestigious educational institution in the capital, where nobles and rich merchants sent their children to study law, philosophy, literature, and other things they needed to live a cultured and comfortable life. She didn't want that life for herself, she had lived it before. She was determined to make this life one of consequence. Her mother's suggestions about alternative education always seemed half-hearted, however. Her conversation with the late Bawako Sarutobi had made Kaori realize that not letting her younger daughter become a shinobi like her husband and eldest daughter would be doing her daughter, her family, and the village a disservice. So really, there was no question about the sort of education Kimiko would receive. The night before her first day at the academy, Kimiko couldn't sleep. 1,000 thoughts ran through her head. What sorts of lessons would she learn? Would it be easier to make friends there who wouldn't mock her for speaking like a grown-up? Would she finally start to fit in with people who weren't her family? As dawn broke, Kimiko sat by her window, watching the soft light creep over Konoha. Her fingers idly traced patterns on the glass. Today wasn't just any day, it was the day she'd take her first real step into the world she'd chosen for herself. When Kaori entered her room to wake her, Kimiko was already dressed, showing precision and meticulousness that was surprising for a 5-year-old to have. Kaori said nothing but gave her daughter a look of pride tinged with longing. The look of a mother getting ready to let her child step out into the real world. Kimiko pretended not to notice, focusing instead on straightening her collar. When she and her mother arrived at the academy, the instructors had prepared a small introduction ceremony for the new enrollees. The third Hokage was present and gave remarks to the gathered group of parents and students, speaking about the will of fire and how he hoped the students would take the lessons they'd learned to heart in order to become shinobi that Konoha would be proud of calling their own. As the Hokage spoke, Kimiko glanced around. Some children fidgeted, their excitement bubbling over, while others clung to their parents, eyes wide with trepidation. Her own heart thudded in her chest, a mix of pride and nervous energy. After the Hokage's remarks, a group of Konoha nin instructed the new students to line up and follow them while the parents stayed behind. Kimiko thought it was a symbolic gesture, representing the parents handing over their children to the care of the academy and its instructors. Kaori knelt to Kimiko's level, smoothing the collar of her shirt with a soft, lingering touch. "Remember, Kimiko," she said, her voice steady but her eyes shimmering. "Do your best, always. Use your head and your heart when making decisions, and whatever you do, your father, sister and I will always love you." Kimiko nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat, and planted a kiss on her mother's cheek before turning to join the line. Group of students were led to the wide, open field behind the academy, where they were told to sit on the ground and wait until their names were called by their assigned academy instructor. Sitting cross-legged on the grass with the other children, Kimiko watched as the instructors called out names, their voices crisp and authoritative. Some children bounced to their feet with eager grins, others shuffled nervously. Kimiko kept her back straight and her gaze steady, her posture pristine. The same way her mother taught her to, even as her palms grew clammy. Kimiko noticed just how many students were enrolled. She supposed it made sense, given how, from what she could understand, the third Hokage and her father, who headed Konoha's Shinobi Training and Development Division, revised the entire Konoha education system at the same time the academy was being rebuilt. For one, they standardized the ages of enrollment and graduation barring truly exceptional circumstances, like Itachi, the last person who graduated earlier than 12, and even that took a lot of debate, said her father. To avoid sending children with single-digit ages into the field with the very real risk of death, given that hidden villages were created to avoid that in the first place. She supposed it made sense. The anime focused a lot on Naruto and the people closest to him, like his friends and classmates, but that didn't mean other shinobi didn't go to school the same time as he did. Besides, if each class only had a single class, the shinobi population would start declining very quickly, given the lethality of the job. Kimiko tried her best to not look suspicious as she scanned the group, trying to pick out the faces of the rest of the rookie 9. She did spot a few familiar faces. She spotted a heavy-set boy munching on chips, next to a slouched boy who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Shikamaru and Choji, huh? They look exactly like I imagined them to. Nearby, a girl with blue hair and pale, pupil-less eyes sat quietly as a wolfish boy chatted enthusiastically beside her. A boy in sunglasses sat on her other side, silent but attentive. So that's Hinata, Shino and Kiba. Her lips twitched into a faint smile. A few paces ahead, a blonde girl with a vibrant smile effortlessly held the attention of a small group, including a diminutive girl with pink hair. Sakura and Ino. I hope I get the same sensei as Nisan had, came a voice beside her, and as Kimiko turned her gaze to the side, she was greeted by the young face of a boy with dark eyes and dark hair, a determined and excited look on his face. Kimiko's heart almost skipped a beat when she recognized who it was. Sasuke, she spoke, not even realizing she said his name out loud. Huh, yes? How do you know my name? Asked Sasuke, tilting his head in slight curiosity. Kimiko blinked at him owlishly, scrambling for an answer. Your mother, Makoto-san? She used to visit my family's tea house. I think I remember you coming with her once. Well, that wasn't the complete truth. The only time she remembered Makoto encountering Makoto and her family at all was when she was barely half a year old, and Sasuke was even younger than she was then. Sasuke frowned, obviously not convinced. I don't remember that. Ask your Ni-san later, she deflected smoothly. That worked with children, didn't it? Isn't he a chunin? My papa and big sis say he's amazing. Oh, Sasuke's expression lit up. He is the best shinobi I know. He's really strong, even Tusan says he's amazing. I want to be just like him, even surpass him one day. Kimiko smiled, listening as Sasuke spoke glowingly of his brother, Itachi. There was no envy in his voice, only pure admiration and affection for a brother he looked up to. Her chest tightened. She knew the impossible choice that awaited Itachi, and the scars it would leave on Sasuke. She couldn't change everything, and she was beginning to make peace with that. She wouldn't be able to prevent every tragedy destined to unfold, but the fact that she was here, face to face with a child who carried the reincarnated essence of Indra, someone who would one day become one of the most powerful figures in this world and leave an indelible mark on it. It made her realize just how potentially significant her presence could be. Their conversation didn't last long after that, as a familiar instructor, a rather awkward and young Iruka Amino, finally had his turn to call who would be part of his class. If I call your name, please line up in front of me. Aburame, Shino, Amano, Masahiko. Kimiko watched as Iruka started reading names off the list, and she actually started to hope that she'd be part of his class, given how easier it would make befriending the characters she was familiar with, whom she knew would play integral roles in the future, both for Konoha and the entire shinobi world. She felt her anxiety rise the closer Iruka got to her surname, but eventually, the moment came. Yamanaka, Ino, and Yuhi, Kimiko. She felt as if a huge weight was lifted off her shoulders, and she immediately joined the gathered line at the back, keeping a serene look on her face. But wait, why did it seem like something was missing? All right, said Iruka with a bright smile. From now on, you will be known as Class 1 to 8. And I will be your sensei, Iruka Amino. Now, if you'd follow me, we're going to go and proceed to our claw. Another instructor came rushing in beside Iruka, whispering something in his ear. Iruka's brows creased, and then a steely frown crossed his face, till it was replaced by a look of resigned acceptance. As the instructor left, Iruka turned to address them again. All right, it seems that we will have another member of our class. Kimiko managed to notice the slight tension in his voice as he spoke. He turned his gaze from them to the sea of students who have yet to be sorted to their respective instructors. Uzumaki, Naruto. Iruka's voice rang out. The field fell silent. Then, like thunder, a triumphant yell shattered the quiet. Yeah. Kimiko turned, unable to suppress a laugh as a yellow-haired boy in a garish orange jumpsuit barreled toward them, beaming. That's me, Uzumaki Naruto, he declared, pointing dramatically at Iruka before turning his attention to them, face filled with determination and enthusiasm. Your new classmate in the future Hokage, you know. Kimiko noticed the awkward silence that followed his proclamation, but instead of embarrassment, she felt a spark of warmth. She smiled at Naruto, genuine, serene. I knew something was missing. Kimiko found the lessons at the academy remarkably simple. It wasn't because being reincarnated in this world had made her inherently smarter, though she couldn't entirely discount the possibility, but because the curriculum was tailored for 6- and 7-year-olds. Simple arithmetic, basic literacy, and introductory history were either skills she'd mastered long ago or concepts she grasped easily, especially after reading more advanced texts in the library. She would have found it incredibly tedious if it didn't give her a chance to feel better about herself and her intelligence despite her having a massively unfair advantage over her peers. Sitting in the middle of the classroom, always within Iruka-sensei's line of sight, she found herself enjoying the lessons. Whether answering questions with confidence or asking thoughtful ones that made Iruka pause, she quickly earned his attention. After one particularly detailed answer about Konoha's early days, Iruka gave her a faint nod, his expression pleased. To her surprise, Sasuke Uchiha had chosen the seat beside her on the first day of class. She guessed he, like most children, gravitated toward familiar faces, and she was the only person he'd exchanged more than 2 words within this new environment. Their morning pre-class routine soon became predictable. Sasuke would walk in, prompting a ripple of whispers and glances from some of the girls. He'd scan the room until he spotted her and then calmly take the seat beside her. "Ohio, Kimiko-chan," he'd say, his voice polite but steady. She'd glance up with a polite nod and a small smile before returning her attention to her notes. Even then, she sometimes felt his gaze linger, not intrusive, just curious. Once, while she was answering a question from Iruka, she noticed Sasuke glancing at her notes. When she turned slightly, their eyes met for a brief moment. He quickly looked away, a faint crease on his brow as though embarrassed to be caught. Other students seemed to take notice of her too. During a lull in the lecture, a boy across the room nudged his friend and glanced her way, only to avert his eyes when she shifted in her seat. Another time, she overheard a girl whispering something about her hair. It was subtle, but noticeable enough to remind Kimiko of the way people often reacted to her presence ever since she started in the academy. Still, she chose to focus on her studies. Attention, after all, wasn't always an advantage. Not everything they learned was academic. Some school days were solely dedicated to practical lessons, like chakra manipulation. Iruka sensei taught them about chakra, the basic theories behind it, and how it was used. But more importantly, he taught them how to manipulate and control it. The leaf exercise was one of the basic chakra exercises Iruka introduced. While it was new to most of the class, some students like Sasuke, Hinata, Shino, and Kimiko were already well beyond the point of finding it challenging. After the 3rd class of practicing, when it became evident that they could do it effortlessly, Iruka-sensei excused them from participating. "You 4 don't need to attend these sessions anymore," Iruka said, his tone kind but firm. "Treat this as a free period, but I highly encourage you to use it productively." Kimiko took this advice to heart and used the time to focus on hand seals. She'd tried performing them as a child and even as a teenager back in the real world. Of course, without chakra, it had been nothing more than a game of finger twister. Here, though, it was serious. Hand seals were fundamental to using jutsu, and precision was everything. A split-second mistake on the battlefield could mean the difference between life and death. She wasn't particularly good at them yet, which was why she asked Sasuke for help. She vaguely remembered that he was talented at hand seals, if not from innate skill, then from being an Uchiha. Even at this young age, his prodigal abilities were starting to show. Sasuke, perhaps grateful for her silent companionship in class or simply liking the chance to feel helpful, agreed. "Okay," Sasuke said, standing across from her at the back of the classroom. His dark eyes were focused, and his hands rested lightly at his sides. Kimiko mirrored his posture, poised but relaxed. Around them, a few students glanced over, some curious and others merely passing time. Naruto, in particular, seemed distracted enough to earn Iruka's scolding. "Bird, snake, rat, ox, dragon," Sasuke called suddenly. Kimiko's hands moved without hesitation, flashing through the sequence with precision and speed. Her motions were mechanical yet fluid, the result of relentless practice. "Dog, bird, monkey, ram, hare." Her hands continued seamlessly, the transitions growing smoother with every seal. She caught the faint upward quirk of Sasuke's lips, a hint of approval, before he raised the difficulty. "Clone jutsu hand seal." For a brief moment, Kimiko had to think, but she didn't falter. Her fingers moved swiftly through the ram, snake, and tiger signs, her muscle memory carrying her through. For an instant, she considered needing chakra to actually perform the jutsu, but Iruka's earlier warning echoed in her mind. No one is allowed to use jutsu in their first 2 years. It wasn't just a rule, it was practical. Most students, still inexperienced in chakra control, risked serious harm if they overextended themselves. Iruka had been clear about the dangers of chakra fatigue and depletion, and she had no intention of testing those limits. Every shinobi had a finite amount of chakra in their reserves. While exercises and training could expand those reserves, much like how someone short might grow taller with effort, there was a limit set by genetics. A shinobi could only develop so far before their natural predispositions set a hard cap. Chakra fatigue was not the same as chakra depletion. Depletion occurred when one ran out of chakra entirely, but chakra fatigue happened when a shinobi pushed themselves to perform jutsu beyond that point. At that stage, the body began drawing energy from other sources, starting with muscles and eventually tapping into more critical areas like internal organs. The consequences were severe. Best case scenario, the shinobi survived but with permanent injuries or diminished reserves, rendering them weaker than before. Worst case? They'd push too far and die. Iruka-sensei explained this to the class early on, emphasizing its importance and why they should learn how to manage their chakra effectively. Both Kimiko and Sasuke were noted to have above-average chakra reserves according to him. However, Kimiko's reserves surpassed not just Sasuke's but also everyone else's in the class, except Naruto. Iruka didn't mention that detail to her, but that was one of the focal points of the series. She doubted she'd exceed his stupid chakra levels. The fact that only someone with Uzumaki genetics and a tailed beast inside them could outmatch her reserves spoke volumes about how much her early chakra maturation had set her apart from her peers. "Good job, Kimiko-chan," Sasuke said, his voice tinged with genuine praise as he clapped her shoulder. "You're still a bit slow on the clone jutsu seals, though." "You had to think for a second." "Sorry," Kimiko replied, her tone light but teasing. "Not everyone can be a prodigal Uchiha." Sasuke beamed at the compliment, puffing his chest slightly. "Well, you're better than anyone else in the class, Kimiko-chan. You're pretty smart." Kimiko couldn't suppress the small smile that tugged at her lips. "Thank you, Sasuke-kun. Do you want to practice more?" Sasuke shook his head. "Maybe tomorrow. Nii-san is picking me up today for shuriken training." He paused, glancing at her. "I'd love to train more tomorrow though. Do you want to practice the hand seals again?" Kimiko blinked, caught off guard by the sudden invitation. Sasuke's dark eyes met hers, earnest and unwavering. How could she refuse? "Sure, Sasuke-kun," she said, her voice polite but warm. "Have fun with Itachi-senpai." Sasuke smiled and nodded before turning and jogging out of the room. The other students were also filing out, most of them exhausted from the day's activities. Kimiko picked up her knapsack and moved toward the door. Iruka gave her a small smile as she passed, which she returned. She paused when she noticed Naruto still seated at his desk, crossing his arms and scowling as Iruka spoke to him. "You need to focus, Naruto-kun," Iruka said, his tone firm but patient. Otherwise, you'll fall behind." Naruto's expression was a mix of indignation and something softer, almost pleased. It was as though he relished the attention, even if it came in the form of a scolding. Kimiko caught his eye as she left and gave him a small, serene smile. Naruto blinked in surprise before a grin spread across his face, the frustration melting away. She inclined her head slightly and walked out, feeling a faint warmth in her chest. Some sort of affection for the boy who did not know how important the man scolding him would be to his life. The teacher whose lessons would make him into the greatest Hokage in history. There's potential in everyone, even if they don't see it yet, she thought, her steps light as she headed home. By their second year, the academy introduced taijutsu training, and with it came physical conditioning. Kimiko had been indifferent to physical education in her past life. She wasn't the last kid picked for dodgeball, but she was far from the first. It had been tolerable then, but the shinobi version of PE? It made her sympathetic to every kid who hated it. Every morning, Iruka's sensei would lead them to the wide field behind the academy, where the first order of business was a run. She still remembered their first day vividly. "Nara, straighten up. Uzumaki, Inazuka, pay attention." Iruka barked, his voice snapping across the field like a whip. Shikamaru groaned but straightened his posture, and the other students quickly fell silent under Iruka's sharp gaze. "A ninja's body is their greatest weapon," he said, pacing in front of them. "Neglect it, and you're as good as dead. If you don't take care of your health, you're not just putting yourself at risk, you're endangering your entire team." His words hung heavy in the air. Iruka paused, his eyes sweeping over the group. When he continued, his tone was steel. "From this day on, we'll start each day with a run around the academy. Then, we'll continue our physical training after lunch break. I expect your full effort during these drills. If you're not willing to give it everything you've got, you might as well stay home." No one hesitated, and what followed was the most miserable 2 hours Kimiko had ever endured. They ran lap after lap, Iruka's voice pushing them just when they thought they couldn't go further. Sweat dripped into her eyes, her lungs burned, and her legs felt like lead. But just when it seemed unbearable, Iruka finally called a halt, as if he could sense the exact moment they were ready to collapse. The days that followed were no better. The exercises grew increasingly grueling. Weighted squats with sandbags, push-up variations, and agility drills that had them dodging blunted shuriken while flipping on balance beams. The field echoed with Iruka's sharp commands and the groans of struggling students. Kimiko hated every second of it. Not because it was hard, but because she wasn't excelling like she was used to. She wasn't failing, in fact, she was doing better than some of her classmates, like Shikamaru, Choji, and Naruto. But compared to Kiba, Hinata, and Ino, she was miles behind. And Sasuke? He was in a league of his own, effortlessly excelling at everything, from endurance runs to strength exercises. It gnawed at her. She had gotten used to standing out in academic and chakra-based lessons. But here, on the field, she felt painfully average. Each stumble, each slower lap, felt like a blow to her confidence. The insecurity bubbled up, whispering fears she didn't want to confront. Was she destined to be mediocre, even in this world? Would she never be anything more than ordinary? Her confidence took another brutal hit when Iruka began teaching them taijutsu. The lessons started with the basics, Konoha Hyojin Kata, or Konoha's standard forms. The style was unremarkable at first glance, straightforward and utilitarian, but it was perfectly suited for the academy's purposes. Designed to level the playing field, it emphasized swift strikes, grapples, and evasive acrobatics, all tailored to help adolescents overcome larger, stronger foes. It was the kind of style that seemed almost mundane until you realized its genius lay in its adaptability, the fact that it provided genin a strong foundation, and that they can quickly branch out to more specialized styles using the style as a baseline. At first, practice involved simply learning and repeating the forms. But soon, Iruka announced the inevitable. "Alright, it's time for traditional shinobi sparring." Iruka's voice rang out one morning, met with cheers and fist pumps from some of the more enthusiastic students. Kimiko's stomach twisted. Sparring was necessary, she understood that. As future shinobi, they had to learn how to fight in real scenarios. The stakes were literally life or death, and Iruka wanted to ensure they applied what they'd learned under pressure. Still, knowing this didn't make her any less nervous. She watched match after match, clapping politely as names were called and winners were declared. She felt her heart beat faster as the inevitable came closer and closer. The winner of this bout is Sasuke Uchiha, Iruka announced, raising his hand toward the young Uchiha, whose flawless speed and impeccable technique had captivated the entire class. A wave of applause broke out, enthusiastic and loud, especially from Sakura and Ino, whose cheers bordered on shrill excitement. Kimiko joined in with a polite, measured clap, but her heart wasn't in it. Her nerves were too frayed to focus on anything other than her own upcoming match. Sasuke's victory only heightened her anxiety, a reminder of the skill level expected in these sparring sessions. Kiba, Sasuke's opponent, groaned as he dusted himself off, muttering something under his breath before trudging over to join Hinata, who offered him a sympathetic smile. Meanwhile, Sasuke made his way back to his seat beside Kimiko, his expression calm and composed, as though the bout had barely challenged him. "You'll be fine, Kimiko," Sasuke whispered, his tone calm and reassuring as he returned to the space beside her. "Easy for you to say, reincarnation of Indra." Kimiko managed a polite smile in response, though her nerves didn't abate. "Next bout. Yamanaka, Ino, and Yuhi, Kimiko," Iruka announced. A louder than usual round of applause broke out, predominantly from the boys. Kimiko felt her cheeks warm but squared her shoulders as Sasuke gave her an encouraging nudge. Stepping into the circle, she faced Ino, whose bright smile belied a sharp confidence. "Good luck, Kimiko-chan," Ino said cheerfully, forming the seal of confrontation. "You too, Ino-chan," Kimiko replied, her voice not as steady as it usually was as she mirrored the seal. Iruka's smile suggested he was pleased with their sportsmanship. "Such polite students," he remarked before raising his hand. "Begin." And it was only then that Kimiko realized, both in this life and her previous one, she'd never truly been in a fight. That split second of hesitation was all Ino needed. Before Kimiko could react, the blonde was already closing the gap, her fist flying forward. Kimiko barely had time to raise her arms in a crossguard. "Focus, Kimiko." The impact jarred her forearms, a dull thud reverberating up her bones. Ino's determined face loomed just beyond her guard as she unleashed two more sharp strikes. Each hit made Kimiko step back, her right foot planted firmly into the ground to keep her balance. As Ino hopped back, Kimiko caught the slight tilt of her opponent's hip, the way her leg cocked subtly. An attack was coming. "Now's my chance." Dropping her guard, Kimiko bent her knees and launched herself forward, her fist shooting out in a straight jab aimed at Ino's head. The other girl's eyes widened, surprised at the speed, but she twisted her neck just in time. The blow glanced off Ino's cheek, a faint bruising streak left behind. Kimiko didn't waste the momentum. She tried to spin into a round kick aimed at Ino's ribs, but her footing wobbled slightly mid-turn. The kick connected weakly with Ino's shin as the other girl raised her leg to block. The jarring impact stung, but Kimiko barely had time to register it before Ino pressed forward. Planting her foot firmly, Ino launched a flurry of quick jabs. Kimiko scrambled back, swaying awkwardly to avoid the strikes. Her breaths came fast and uneven as she struggled to keep up with Ino's relentless offense. And then, Kimiko saw an opening. Ino planted her feet and pushed off the ground, twisting her body into a spinning kick aimed at Kimiko's head. The move was graceful and precise, the kind of attack you'd see in a training manual. Kimiko had only a fraction of a second to react. She bent her knees and launched herself backward into a flip, the wind from Ino's kick brushing past her face. She landed several feet away, wobbling slightly but upright. She'll need a second to steady herself after that move. Kimiko didn't waste the opportunity. She sprinted forward, her breaths shallow but determined. Ino was just landing, her balance still shaky. "This is my chance. If I strike fast enough, I can take her down." Kimiko threw a powerful hook, aiming for Ino's face, but the glint of focus in Ino's eyes warned her too late, it was a trap. Ino batted her punch aside with effortless precision, leaving Kimiko wide open. Pain exploded in Kimiko's abdomen as Ino drove a quick 1-2 combination into her stomach. The force of the punches knocked the wind out of her, and she staggered back, clutching her middle. Her vision blurred for a moment, and she barely registered Ino stepping in for a third strike, a straight punch aimed at her head. "No, I can't lose." Kimiko twisted her body just in time, the punch grazing her temple instead of landing squarely. The impact still left her reeling, her ears ringing, but she used the momentum to grab Ino's extended arm. Her fingers clamped down like a vice, nails biting into Ino's forearm as she twisted it sharply. Ino gasped, trying to pull free, but Kimiko held on with all her strength. Kimiko struck back. Her first punch connected with Ino's ribs, eliciting a sharp gasp. Her second found its mark on Ino's stomach, and on the third strike, she raised her knee, slamming it into Ino's abdomen. The other girl doubled over, spitting out saliva, her body curling instinctively against the pain. But Ino wasn't done yet. She mustered her strength, yanking her arm free from Kimiko's grip and leaping back to create distance. Her movements were slower now, her breath labored, but her eyes burned with fierce determination. The cheers of their classmates echoed in the background, split between support for both fighters. Kimiko raised her arms into the standard fighting stance, her muscles screaming in protest but her resolve unbroken. Ino mirrored her, steadying herself and raising her fists again. They moved at the same time, charging toward each other in a final clash. Neither dodged, neither hesitated. Ino's fist crashed into Kimiko's temple just as Kimiko's kick connected with Ino's jaw. The simultaneous impact sent a shockwave through both of their bodies. For a brief moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Kimiko's legs buckled beneath her, and she collapsed onto her back, her chest heaving as the sky above blurred in and out of focus. Across from her, Ino wavered, her entire body trembling, but somehow, she remained upright. The winner of this bout is Ino Yamanaka. Iruka's voice cut through the haze. Polite applause and scattered cheers erupted around them. Kimiko forced herself up onto one elbow, her pride stinging more than her body. Ino, still clutching her stomach, extended a hand to her. "Good fight, Kimiko-chan," Ino said. Her smile warmed despite the strain etched into her features. She extended her fingers to her, which Kimiko took, forming the seal of reconciliation. "Thank you," she responded, perhaps a bit too curtly. But Kimiko was disappointed and deflated at her loss. "It's your win." Iruka gave both girls a ruffle on the head before sending them back. Kimiko sank onto the ground beside Sasuke, who leaned closer. "You did well," he said quietly, trying to reassure her. Kimiko barely nodded, lost in her thoughts. "My first fight, and I lost." Despite all the advantages she had, advantages that only gods like Madara, Hashirama, and Minato had, she still fell short. The taste of failure was bitter, and her confidence, fragile as it was, felt like it was crumbling. For the next 2 days, Kimiko drifted through her routines in a haze. She didn't cry, but her silence was louder than any tears. She answered her family's questions about school with polite, clipped responses, avoiding eye contact. Even Sasuke, who usually found her company pleasant, seemed to keep his distance, his concerned glances tinged with frustration. It wasn't until Iruka-sensei took her aside after class that something changed. "Kimiko-chan," he said as she began packing her things. His tone was soft, but it stopped her in her tracks. "Is everything all right?" "Yes, sensei," she replied automatically, her voice flat. "I'm sorry for not participating much today. It's just, Kimiko." Iruka cut her off gently but firmly. "I may not have been teaching for long, but I know when one of my brightest students is troubled." "Is this about your match with Ino-chan?" Her shoulders stiffened, and her hands clutched her bag. She couldn't meet his gaze, her head bowing under the weight of her frustration. Iruka crouched slightly, angling his face to meet hers. "Kimiko-chan, that match could have gone either way. You didn't do poorly. In fact, you did better than most would in your place. But you'll only truly lose if you let one setback defeat you." Her lip trembled, and tears welled in her crimson eyes. "I tried so hard, sensei. I practiced and practiced, but it's like I'll never catch up." Iruka's expression softened, a mix of sympathy and quiet amusement. "You do work hard, Kimiko-chan," he said. "But do you think Ino-chan doesn't? Or Hinata, Kiba, Shino, even Naruto?" Kimiko blinked, caught off guard by the question. "It's not about how fast you learn or how strong you are right now," Iruka continued, tapping a finger against her chest. "It's about what's in here. A shinobi's greatest strength isn't their jutsu or skill, it's their will to keep going, even when it feels impossible." Kimiko stared at him, her tears forgotten for a moment. When the body is tired and the mind is weary, It's your heart that keeps you moving forward, Iruka said firmly. There will always be someone better, stronger, faster. But that doesn't mean you give up. It means you push harder, climb higher. That's how you'll become a great kunoichi, not by being the best all the time, but by never stopping, no matter how many mountains you face. For a moment, the classroom was quiet, his words sinking into her like rain on parched soil. Kimiko swallowed hard and nodded, her voice barely a whisper. Thank you, sensei. Iruka smiled, straightening up. Good. Now, don't let me catch you slacking tomorrow. You've got mountains to climb. That conversation with Iruka stayed with her, echoing in her mind like a steady drumbeat. She understood now why he had such a profound influence on Naruto. Why his words would shape the boy into the great man he would become. Iruka truly believed in his students, each and every one of them, with a sincerity that felt almost foreign to her. In her old world, people like him didn't seem to exist. Kimiko took his advice to heart, pouring her disappointment and frustration into something tangible. She worked harder than ever before, not in desperate bursts of energy that fizzled out, but with a steady, unyielding drive. The next morning, she arrived at the academy before dawn, surprising even Iruka, who was setting up for the day. She didn't stop there. During their morning exercises, she pushed herself relentlessly, not giving in to fatigue or frustration. Each step, each motion carried a silent vow. I will not be average. Her determination didn't waver. During free periods, she sought out Sasuke to spar, uncaring that he won every bout with ease or that his smirk suggested he wasn't even trying. And when he was indisposed, she carved out a quiet corner of the yard to train alone. While others played, she drilled the Konoha Hyojin Kata until the movements felt like second nature, her strikes sharp and precise, her form improving with each repetition. At home, her newfound diligence didn't go unnoticed. On Sundays, she woke before the sun and ran laps around the compound, her breath clouding in the crisp morning air. She returned only when the rest of the house began to stir. Kurenai watched her one morning from the porch, a bemused smile on her lips. You're reminding me of this coworker of mine with all this training, Kimiko. Make sure you don't start shouting about the springtime of youth, she teased, though her voice carried a note of pride. Her father, Shinku, was less subtle in his approval. Good. That's the spirit of a true shinobi, he said one evening, watching her practice strikes against a wooden post in the yard. His grin was wide, his voice warm. Keep this up, and you'll surpass us all. Kimiko's muscles ached, and her body felt like it was being pushed to its limits, but she welcomed it. Each drop of sweat, each sting of exhaustion, reminded her of why she was doing this. I will climb higher. I will be more. And she'd be lying if she said she didn't notice the improvements. Slowly but surely, her hard work began to pay off. During endurance training, she was often one of the last standing, usually alongside Sasuke and, to the surprise of many, Naruto. Despite his shaky start, Naruto's determination was undeniable, and while his progress was slower, he was steadily improving. Kimiko's aim had also become something her classmates feared. In Shuriken Tag, a game Iruka often used to sharpen their accuracy under pressure, few wanted to face her. Her throws were sharp and precise, second only to Sasuke's, and more than once, her well-placed shots had classmates scrambling for cover. Even Sasuke had to admit just how much Kimiko had improved during one of their sparring matches. He ducked under her hook and parried her kick with his forearm, retreating a step to regain his footing. But Kimiko was relentless. Closing the distance in an instant, she drove her elbow into his jaw and followed up with a sharp kick to his stomach, sending him sliding backward across the dirt. Sasuke blinked, momentarily stunned. He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand and grinned, his dark eyes glinting with both surprise and respect. Wow, that's the first time you've managed to land a hit on me, Kimiko. She froze, her hands still raised in a guard position. I did? Lowering her arms slightly, she stared at him, her crimson eyes wide with disbelief. Sasuke's grin widened. Yeah, and you're getting better every time. He straightened, rolling his shoulders. Kimiko's lips curled into a small, determined smile. Only because of your training, Sasuke-kun. Do you want to continue? She spread her legs and lifted both her arms, snapping into her combat stance. Raising his fists, Sasuke chuckled. Guess I'll have to take you seriously now. The academy emptied out slowly, students trickling out in pairs and small groups, their laughter and chatter filling the warm afternoon air. Kimiko lingered behind, walking alone along the path that led to the residential district where her family lived. Her family usually let her go home alone now, given that she often stayed later to spar with Sasuke after school. That, and since attending the academy, the people of Konoha had grown familiar enough with her to keep an eye on her as she walked home. Her mind buzzed with thoughts of the day's lessons and Sasuke's compliment during their sparring match. She didn't quite feel like celebrating, there was still so much she needed to work on. But still, managing to make Sasuke acknowledge her, when he usually didn't pay anyone any mind, especially other girls. It made her giddy. It was as if Sasuke was beginning to see her as an equal, or at least someone worth respecting. That didn't happen with his peers in the anime, not until Naruto caught up with him. Her musings were cut short when she spotted a familiar figure up ahead, Naruto Uzumaki. But he wasn't alone. 3 boys surrounded him, their postures aggressive. At the center of the group was a green-haired boy, tall and broad-shouldered for his age, flanked by 2 smaller boys who laughed at every word he said. Naruto stood defiant, his small fists clenched and his blue eyes blazing, but it was clear he was outnumbered and outmatched. "You're just a loser. No one wants you here," the green-haired boy sneered, giving Naruto's shoulder a hard shove. Naruto staggered but didn't fall, his gaze steady despite the redness in his cheeks. "I'm not a loser. I'm going to be Hokage one day, believe it," Naruto shouted back, his voice cracking slightly. One of the bullies roared with laughter. "Hokage? You can't even make a clone without falling on your face. Maybe Hokage of idiots." Kimiko's lips pressed into a thin line. She stepped forward, closing the distance before any of them could even notice her. When she spoke, her voice was cold and cutting. "And what are you going to be? Hokage of cowards?" The boys froze, their heads snapping toward her. Naruto blinked, his mouth opening slightly in surprise. "Kimiko-chan," said Naruto, his tone equal parts awe and confusion. Her eyes moved to scan over the other boys' faces. She didn't recognize the 2 smaller ones, but she remembered the leader, Asahi Fuma of the Fuma clan. He was there during the opening ceremony. He was in the class that Mizuki taught. The name made her heart harden. One of the first people who put Naruto in harm's way. "I didn't think the Fuma clan taught its members to gang up on people," she said, her expression one of imperious disdain, the same look her mother wore when deeply displeased. "Or was it Mizuki-sensei who taught you this cowardly behavior?" The Fuma boy glared at her hatefully. "They always did when their families were mentioned. This isn't your business, Yuhi. It became my business the moment you decided to gang up on someone half your size," Kimiko shot back, her tone calm but cold and unyielding. She took a step closer, her crimson eyes locking with the boys. 3 against 1? How impressive. Are you planning to brag about this later?" The smaller boys shuffled uncomfortably, exchanging uneasy glances, but the Fuma boy stood his ground. "What's it to you? He's a student of the academy, just like the rest of us," Kimiko interrupted sharply. "And unlike you, he's not afraid to stand on his own." Naruto's eyes widened at her words, his lips parting slightly as if he couldn't quite believe someone was standing up for him. The Fuma boy scoffed but didn't move closer. "You think you're so smart, huh? Just because you're family. Leave, now." Kimiko's voice dropped an octave, her stance shifting slightly, ready for a fight if necessary. She doubted any of them were as good as Sasuke, or even Ino. She raised her chin, her expression unyielding. "Or I'll make sure Iruka-sensei hears exactly how brave you are." The Fuma boy's jaw tightened, but the weight of her gaze, as well as the sudden shuffling back of the other boys, made him hesitate. Finally, he turned with a snarl, shoving one of his companions. "Come on, this isn't worth it." The trio slinked away, their muttered curses fading into the distance. Kimiko turned to Naruto, her expression softening slightly. "Are you all right?" she asked, tilting her head. Naruto stared at her for a moment before grinning widely, his blue eyes sparkling with gratitude. "Yeah, I'm fine. I could have handled them myself, though." Kimiko's lips twitched into a faint smile. "Of course you could, but you shouldn't have to." Naruto's grin faltered slightly, his gaze dropping. "Thanks, Kimiko-chan. No one usually, stands up for me." Her heart ached at that, and something in her, something protective and fierce, the part of her that clung to the idea that she wasn't just a 6-year-old girl but someone older, someone who understood loneliness, seized her before she realized. Then it's about time someone did. Naruto's smile returned, brighter than before. You're awesome, you know that? Kimiko chuckled softly, leading him toward the road. Come on, let's walk home. As they walked side by side, Naruto's chatter filling the air, the chatter of someone who was ecstatic that someone actually stood up for him. Kimiko felt a small spark of warmth in her chest. For all her doubts and struggles, moments like these reminded her why she was here. This world was cruel, but perhaps she could make it a little kinder, one step at a time. As she had anticipated, Naruto stuck to her like glue the very next day. His boisterous chatter filled every moment, often disrupting her focus during training or study. While she tried to remain tolerant, his constant antics, his loud voice, his endless stories, his insistence on being noticed, grated on her nerves more than she cared to admit. It didn't take long for Sasuke to start avoiding her during breaks, his trademark scowl deepening whenever Naruto's voice echoed across the training yard. I can't concentrate with him around, Sasuke muttered one afternoon, sparing a pointed glance in Naruto's direction before stalking off to train alone. Kimiko tried to bear it. She really did. She understood why Naruto behaved the way he did. She knew the loneliness that drove him, the desperate yearning to be acknowledged. It wasn't his fault, and she knew that better than most. But just because she understood didn't mean she had the patience to always deal with it. It came to a head one afternoon during sparring practice when Naruto, once again, shouted out her name from the sidelines, his cheers drowning out her instructor's advice. She barely managed to block a punch from her opponent, her irritation flaring like wildfire. Enough, Naruto, she snapped, the words sharper than she intended. Naruto's face fell, his expression startled and hurt. Kimiko's chest tightened with guilt, but before she could say anything else, Iruka-sensei called for a break, sparing her the need to address the moment immediately. As the lunch break began, Kimiko glanced over at Naruto, who was sitting by himself, idly drawing aimless patterns in the dirt with a stick. His usual vibrancy seemed dimmed, his shoulders slightly hunched. Something about the sight tugged at her heart, and before she could stop herself, she was already walking toward him, the bento her mother had prepared in her hand. "Hello, Naruto," she said softly, taking a seat beside him. Naruto's gaze snapped up, his eyes widening in surprise. "Oh, hello, Kimiko-chan." His voice was still loud, but it carried a faint hint of somberness that was unusual for him. "Do you want to share my lunch with me?" she asked, holding out the bento with a small smile. Naruto blinked at her, his wide eyes brimming with surprise and something that almost looked like gratitude. His face broke into a big, goofy grin, the kind that only Naruto could manage. "It's not like you had to ask. We're friends, you know." "That's right," Kimiko replied gently, her smile widening. "We are." And just like that, the tension from earlier melted away. It was an unspoken apology, one that Naruto accepted with the ease of a child who knew what it meant to be lonely and desperately valued even the smallest acts of kindness. For all his flaws, Kimiko knew Naruto was a good kid, one who wore his heart on his sleeve and who would grow into the most loyal friend anyone could ask for. Even if he weren't destined to become one of the most integral parts of Konoha's future, Kimiko realized she would want him in her corner. Naruto had a way of making people better simply by being himself, and in his own chaotic, stubborn way, he helped her see the kind of person she wanted to become at her second chance in life. "All right, everyone, pay attention," said Iruka-sensei, his arms crossed as he scanned the eager faces of his students. They were lined up on the path to the large training field behind the academy, the afternoon sunlight casting long shadows over the group. "Today's sparring session will be a bit different," Iruka continued, his tone quiet, letting anticipation build. "Get on with it, Iruka-sensei." Naruto's voice rang out, drawing a wave of chuckles from their classmates. Even Kimiko found herself stifling a demure giggle behind her hand, a small smile tugging at her lips. Iruka sighed, running a hand down his face. "Naruto," he muttered, shaking his head. "All right. Instead of sparring against your classmates, Mizuki-sensei and I decided to have two of the best students in our class compete in an exhibition match." Excited murmurs rippled through the group, the buzz of curiosity and speculation growing louder. Kimiko tilted her head, intrigued. "Now, I expect all of you to be on your best behavior and show your support to our class's representatives." Iruka's chest puffed out slightly as he delivered the announcement with pride. "All right, So I'll be representing our class, huh, Iruka-sensei. I'll beat whoever Mizuki-sensei's student is, believe it. Naruto declared, leaping up from his spot with a triumphant grin. More laughter erupted, Kiba's loud and wolfish among them. Sure, Naruto, he teased, leaning back and crossing his arms. Iruka sighed again, rubbing his temples. No, Naruto, he said flatly, causing the blonde boy to pause mid-pose and dramatically fall back into his seat, eliciting more giggles. Iruka's tone shifted, drawing their focus. The pair representing our class will be Sasuke Uchiha. No surprises there. The murmurs turned to nods and whispered agreements. Kimiko glanced at Sasuke, who kept his expression calm and composed. She gave him a small nudge of encouragement. He responded with a faint, confident smile. Out of the corner of her eye, she caught Ino and Sakura shooting them curious, slightly annoyed glances. And Kimiko Yuhi, Iruka added. Kimiko blinked, the words not fully registering at first. Her? Applause and cheers swelled around her, though none as loud as Naruto's exuberant yell. Alright, go and win, Kimiko-chan. Though not everyone seemed pleased. She could feel her classmates' gazes shifting toward her, and a faint whisper carried from somewhere behind her. Of course she gets picked. She's like, perfect at everything. The voice was muffled but audible enough for Kimiko to hear, and she felt heat rise to her cheeks. Another voice followed with a hushed, and did you see Sasuke smile at her? He never smiles at anyone. Kimiko straightened her posture, pretending not to notice. Her nerves buzzed beneath her calm exterior. Why her? Surely someone like Hinata, who specialized in taijutsu, would be a better choice. The familiar grip of nervousness began tightening around her chest, but she barely had time to dwell on it before she felt a sharp nudge under the table. Sasuke had lightly kicked her foot, drawing her attention. We can do it, he said smoothly, his dark eyes steady on hers. You've gotten pretty good. Kimiko swallowed hard, his words both reassuring and unsettling. Thanks, she murmured, forcing a small smile. But as she glanced toward the training field, she couldn't shake the knot of anxiety forming in her stomach. This wasn't just sparring, it was representing her class. And the thought of failing in front of everyone loomed large in her mind. No, she told herself. It's because I'm representing this class that I need to be focused. I can't afford to let these people down. It didn't take long before they were gathered in the training field. The two classes were divided into two groups, each facing the other with an air of anticipation. In the center of the field, their sensei conversed quietly, likely finalizing the match order. Kimiko's gaze, however, was fixed on Mizuki, who stood among the instructors with his trademark easy smile. Her crimson eyes hardened, venom seeping into her expression. The sight of him, the very man who would one day put an innocent child in harm's way for his own selfish gain, turned her stomach. That someone so deceitful and cruel could work as a teacher made her skin crawl. How could a person like that be entrusted with shaping the next generation of shinobi? Kimiko tore her gaze away, unwilling to let her loathing consume her thoughts. Mizuki had just leapt back to join his class, leaving Iruka standing alone in the middle of the field to address the students. Alright, quiet, please. Iruka's voice cut through the chatter, and the noise quickly died down. He offered a warm smile to both classes before continuing. The first match will be Uchiha Sasuke versus Morita Tenma. Cheers erupted from both sides as the two boys stepped into the center of the field. Iruka raised his hand high, and the pair exchanged the seal of confrontation, their movements sharp with focus. Begin. Iruka's hand came down in a swift chop, and the boys exploded into action. It was over almost as soon as it began. Both rushed forward, but it quickly became clear who had the upper hand. Sasuke's movements were precise, every strike deliberate and efficient. His form was exceptional for his age, and Kimiko, thanks to her own training, could see the difference. There was no wasted motion, no hesitation in his attacks. His opponent grunted as Sasuke landed a solid kick to his stomach, followed by two clean punches to the face. A jumping knee to the chin sent the boy sprawling onto his back, utterly defeated. Winner, Uchiha Sasuke, Iruka announced. Their class erupted into cheers, the loudest coming from the girls. Kimiko joined in with a polite applause, her clapping delicate but genuine. You're so cool, Sasuke-kun. A girl's voice squealed from behind her. Kimiko didn't react outwardly, but a small part of her silently agreed. Your turn, Kimiko. Sasuke passed her as she walked toward the center of the arena. His expression was calm, but the faintest hint of a smirk tugged at his lips. Kimiko met his gaze with her own serene determination before stepping forward. As she stood in the center, a wave of encouragement rolled over her. You can do it, Kimiko. Make our class proud, Kimiko. You can do it, Kimiko-chan. Naruto's voice rose above all the others, loud and enthusiastic, drawing amused glances from the crowd. Kimiko felt a small, genuine smile tug at her lips. After that outpouring of support, there was no way she could let him, or their class, down. To her credit, Kimiko didn't show the slightest flicker of surprise when her opponent stepped forward. I didn't know you were considered one of the best in your class, Fuma Asahi, she said, her tone laced with idle disinterest. Her crimson gaze, cool and unyielding, met her opponent's eyes without fear. A dark shadow passed over Asahi's face, his jaw tightening at her words, but Kimiko barely paid him any mind. Her focus shifted briefly to Mizuki, standing just behind his student. His easy smile seemed too deliberate, too smug. What are you planning? All right, for our next and final bout, Yuhi Kimiko vs Fuma Asahi. Iruka's voice rang out, met with an enthusiastic round of cheers from the students. Kimiko barely heard them. Her world had narrowed to the boy in front of her. Her crimson eyes locked onto his, and she raised her hand, forming the seal of confrontation. Asahi mirrored her gesture, though his movements were sharp, almost impatient. The crowd's energy dulled into a tense silence as they took their stances. Kimiko drew in a steadying breath, her body fluidly shifting into the foundational form of Konoha's Hyojin Kata. One hand extended before her, palm open, while the other curled into a tight fist below her chin. She dragged one foot back, grounding herself. Asahi, for his part, mirrored her stance with slight variations, his frame larger but his movements less refined. His dark eyes bore into hers, his confidence clear. Begin! Iruka's sharp command cut through the quiet. This time, she was the one who immediately went on the offensive, closing the distance between herself and Asahi in just a few seconds. Judging by the murmurs from her classmates and even the two instructors, no one had expected her to be so fast, or so aggressive. Asahi barely had time to raise his guard. The flimsy two-handed shield he threw up to protect his face crumpled under the surprising weight of her punch. He staggered back, her fist connecting with a satisfying crunch against his nose. She would never be the strongest. Even for an 8-year-old she was petite and doll-like, but that also meant that no one expected her to actually have some strength. Kimiko pressed her advantage ruthlessly, unwilling to let him recover. She threw two sharp jabs, both aimed at his midsection. The second strike landed squarely, making Asahi double over with a pained grunt. Wear your opponent down. Keep them on the defensive. Her father's words echoed in her mind as she stepped forward to follow through. Asahi managed to disengage, stumbling back to create distance, but Kimiko dashed forward before he could fully reset. He lashed out with a kick aimed at her head, but it was too slow and too predictable. Her arm came up instinctively to block, and with a sharp shove, she deflected his leg, throwing him off balance. Her focus narrowed, her movements automatic. She ducked under two wild punches, each less refined than the last, her opponent growing desperate. If Kimiko had been in his position, she would have feinted a retreat to bait her pursuer, countering with a decisive strike to disrupt their rhythm. But Fuma Asahi wasn't Kimiko Yuhi. He hadn't gone through the painstaking training she endured every single day. He didn't have mountains to climb. Asahi attempted a spinning kick, but at this range, it was a fatal error. Kimiko stepped in, her hand snapping out to halt his leg before it could rise. With a swift motion, she stomped on his knee, forcing him to flinch. The moment his balance wavered, she pushed down harder, using his leg as a springboard to propel herself upward. Her momentum carried her higher as she stepped onto his face, her foot striking hard against his cheek. She pushed off with a sharp kick, using both feet this time, driving the soles of her shoes into his face with brutal precision. The impact sent Asahi reeling backward, his arms flailing as he stumbled to the ground. Kimiko landed lightly on her feet, her stance seamlessly resetting to the standard starting position. For a fleeting moment, she couldn't help but feel a spark of pride. I must have looked flawless just now. Asahi struggled to his feet, blood dripping from his nose, his breaths ragged. Yet, despite his battered state, he refused to give up. Iruka-sensei's gaze flicked between them, concern flashing in his eyes. It was clear to everyone watching, this match was over, and Asahi was outmatched. "You think you're that great, huh?" Asahi spat, limping forward. His words carried venom, but his movements betrayed his exhaustion. Kimiko felt her stance instinctively loosen. "This is just a kid. Give up," she said evenly, her voice steady but not unkind. "There's no shame in knowing when you're beaten." Her attempt at reason only seemed to enrage him further. "Go to hell," he snarled. He charged toward her again, wild and desperate. Kimiko readied herself, her stance tightening as she prepared to end this with a single, decisive blow. But then, he changed direction mid-charge. Her body pivoted instinctively to track him as he veered to her left, but the sudden shift threw her off balance. Before she could fully adjust, he jumped into the air and reached into his jacket. Her crimson eyes widened as realization dawned. A weapon. In one fluid motion, Asahi hurled a shuriken toward her, weaving hand signs with alarming speed. "Secret Fuma clan art. Shuriken expansion jutsu," he shouted. The spinning shuriken expanded mid-flight, growing to an enormous size without losing its momentum. The sharp, metallic hum of the blade sliced through the air, hurtling toward her like a guillotine. It was massive, easily her size, and it aimed to bisect her where she stood. "No, stop, Kimiko-chan." The panicked cries of her classmates echoed around her, but they were distant, drowned out by the pounding of her heart. Iruka-sensei began to sprint toward her, but he was too far away. And Mizuki? The sick smile on his face confirmed her suspicion. He'd orchestrated this. She had to save herself. Her mind raced, her body moving on instinct. Ram, snake, tiger. The massive shuriken hit her, slicing cleanly through her body, only for her form to vanish in a puff of white smoke. Gasps rippled through the crowd as the smoke cleared, revealing not one, but two identical copies of Kimiko, standing a short distance apart, poised and unharmed. The real Kimiko's crimson eyes locked onto Asahi, her expression calm yet unyielding. Asahi landed heavily, his face a mask of disbelief. His oversized shuriken clattered to the ground with a dull thud, its edge buried in the dirt. He staggered, his body swaying as exhaustion overtook him. With a single, defeated groan, he collapsed. There was chaos in the aftermath. Iruka and Mizuki quickly descended into a heated argument, with Mizuki denying any knowledge of Asahi having a shuriken or knowing one of his clan's jutsu. Iruka's furrowed brow and clenched fists betrayed his frustration, though perhaps their years of friendship blinded him from seeing Mizuki as clearly as Kimiko did. She bit back the urge to interject, knowing it wasn't her place, but her red gaze lingered on Mizuki, cold and calculating. Her classmates, meanwhile, swarmed her with mixed reactions. Ino and a shy Sakura approached first, their concern genuine. "Are you okay, Kimiko-chan?" Ino asked, her voice tinged with worry. "I'm fine," Kimiko replied, her tone gracious as she nodded to them. "Thank you for asking." Sasuke, ever unflappable, simply shrugged when their eyes met. "I knew you'd figure it out," he said coolly. "The moment you started weaving those signs, it was obvious." Naruto, on the other hand, was as loud as ever, his voice cutting through the chatter. "Wow, that was so cool, Kimiko-chan," he exclaimed, practically bouncing on his feet. "Can you teach me how to do that too?" Despite herself, Kimiko felt a small smile tugging at her lips. "We'll see, Naruto-kun," she said, her tone light. His sheer enthusiasm was infectious, and for a moment, the weight of what had just transpired lifted slightly. As they walked, Kimiko caught sight of her father waiting outside, speaking with Iruka, his expression severe. One of the two people in their year functioning at a high genin level. Kimiko caught the tail end of the conversation before Shinku's eyes found hers, his face softening instantly. Iruka turned to her with a fond smile and ruffled her hair as he excused himself to return to the academy. Shinku extended his hand, which Kimiko took without question. "So, you had an eventful day, huh?" Shinku said, his eyes twinkling with a mix of pride and concern. "We just had a sparring match, San," Kimiko replied evenly, maintaining her composed demeanor. "It was hardly worth all that fanfare." Shinku raised a brow, his amusement evident. "I heard from your sensei that you performed a perfect clone jutsu, a jutsu you shouldn't be able to perform, much less perfect," Till you're about to graduate from the academy a few years from now. And you think it's nothing worth fussing over? Kimiko shrugged lightly. Sasuke's Ni-san, Itachi Senpai, could perform a Kage Bunshin when he was my age. Sasuke told me he can already do his clan's fireball jutsu. As if summoned by her words, Sasuke appeared, holding Itachi's hand. Sasuke turned to wave at her. See you tomorrow, Kimiko. Kimiko smiled in return, nodding politely at both brothers. Shinku watched them for a moment before turning back to her. If you're comparing yourself to the top student in your year and one of Konoha's greatest prodigies, then you're proving my point. Kimiko offered a serene smile. I just want to be like you, Ka-san, and Ne-san. That's why I work so hard. As they walked, Kimiko spotted another familiar figure walking alone ahead of them. Without hesitation, she called out, Naruto. The boy stopped mid-step and turned toward her, his face breaking into a wide, infectious grin. He waved enthusiastically. Kimiko-chan, let's see each other tomorrow. You don't need to train with that stupid Sasuke. Train with me instead, he exclaimed, his voice brimming with excitement. Kimiko couldn't help but giggle softly at his exuberance. She didn't reply, simply offering him a small wave in return. Naruto beamed and waved back before continuing on his way, his bright energy lingering even after he disappeared down the path. Her father remained quiet for a moment, a thoughtful expression settling on his face as they resumed their walk home. I see you made friends, he said, slowly. The Uchiha boy and the yellow-haired boy. Sasuke and Naruto, yes. She knew what her father wanted to say next, so she decided to innocently offer the information he wanted to know. I saw him a week or two ago on my way home. 3 boys were pushing him around, including the Fuma boy I fought. I drove them away. Shinku tilted his head slightly. Why did you get involved? Kimiko hesitated, then spoke earnestly. I don't like bullies, Tusan. Especially those who gang up on someone just to tear them down. I don't think you, Ka-san, or Ne-san would have wanted me to let that happen either. Shinku's gaze lingered on her, unreadable, before he nodded. And what do you make of him? And the Uchiha boy? Kimiko blinked at the question, then tilted her head thoughtfully. Sasuke is cool. Everyone thinks so. But I think he tries so hard because he wants to be like his Ni-san and make his father proud. Her tone softened. And Naruto? People tell their kids to stay away from him, but you never told me to. He's loud, sure, but no more than Kiba or other boys and girls. He's good, though. Loyal. People make fun of his dream, but why shouldn't he try? The Hokage isn't about being fancy or being rich, or even having a family. It's about being a loyal citizen of the Leaf, right? And isn't that what Naruto is? Shinku's lips twitched into a faint smile. As they reached the door to their home, Kimiko looked up at him, her crimson eyes shining. Tusan? Shinku hummed as he slid the door open. Kimiko smiled sweetly. Can you and Ne-san start teaching me some cool jutsu? Ha! Yelled Shinku, his bamboo shinai held low at his side, both hands gripping the hilt tightly as he charged forward, his bare feet slapping against the wooden floor with a steady rhythm. Kimiko stood her ground, her shorter shinai, a tanto-sized practice blade, held firmly before her in a two-handed grip. Her crimson eyes never left her father, who, despite his graying hair, moved with the agility of a man half his age. Shinku closed the distance in a flash, raising his blade high overhead before bringing it down in a sharp arc, a strike meant to cleave through an opponent from head to waist. Kimiko didn't falter. Instead of blocking directly, she swung her tanto upward in a horizontal arc, catching the descending blade against the flat of her own. Her feet dug into the floor, her entire body straining as she locked her father's strike in place. Ho, you're getting stronger, Kimiko. Faster, too, Shinku remarked with a grin, his face close to hers as their blades trembled in a contest of wills. Kimiko didn't reply. Instead, she cocked her knee back and thrust out with a sharp front kick. Shinku disengaged, leaping backward with practiced ease. Kimiko didn't hesitate. She surged forward, her blade held diagonally, its tip skimming just above the floor. Yes, stand your ground and defend, but strike with resolve when you attack. That is the philosophy of Konoha Ryu Kenjutsu. Shinku boomed, his voice resonating through the room as Kimiko brought her sword upward in a sweeping strike. He met her blade with a precise downward parry, the clash of bamboo echoing sharply. Kimiko pressed the attack, her strikes coming in a relentless flurry from all directions. Shinku moved like an unshakable oak, his stance firm as he deflected each blow, stepping back only enough to keep his footing. He wasn't content with defending forever. As Kimiko lunged forward with a thrust, Shinku slapped her blade aside with a sharp twist of his wrist, leaving her wide open. In a real battlefield, the follow-up swing he unleashed, a brutal, horizontal slash, would have beheaded her. Reacting on instinct, Kimiko's free hand shot to her chest. Her fingers blurred through a sequence of seals. She wasn't yet confident in her one-handed seals, but her father had insisted she master them. A kenjutsu specialist must always have one hand on their blade, which means their other hand must know how to do the work of two, he'd said. And now, that lesson was the only thing keeping her from defeat. The bamboo blade closed in on her neck, and a split second before impact, she completed the final sign and shouted, "Ninja art! Blossoming escape!" The moment wood met flesh, her form burst into an explosion of crimson petals. They swirled in the air, vibrant and mesmerizing, catching the light as they drifted around Shinku. For a brief moment, the petals seemed to fill the entire room, their spinning motion disorienting. Kimiko was enveloped in darkness, her body feeling weightless and suspended in a void for the fleeting heartbeat it took to reform behind her father. The sensation was jarring, similar to the disorientation one felt when first performing a substitution jutsu, but she had trained herself to adapt quickly. As her feet touched the ground, she landed with quiet precision, her tanto poised in her grip. Around her, the crimson petals swirled briefly before scattering into the air and fading into nothingness, leaving only the faintest trace of their presence. "Ha!" Shinku exclaimed, whirling around to face her, a broad grin on his face. "Not content with mastering the academy's jutsu, are we? Did your sister teach you that?" Kimiko gave a small, almost sheepish smile, still catching her breath. "She might have shown me once," she admitted. She'd watched Kurenai perform it during a sparring session with Shinku, and Kimiko's sharp eyes memorized the seals and the way her sister manipulated her chakra. The rest had been hours of painstaking practice, secret, stolen moments in the dead of night. "Well done," Shinku said, his voice brimming with pride. "Adaptation and ingenuity. That's how a shinobi survives. Kurenai would be proud of you, Kimiko." He raised his blade, gripping the hilt with both hands, the blade now parallel with his face. "But I sense you still have more tricks. Come, attack." Kimiko obliged, leaping high into the air with her tanto aimed directly at her father's neck. Her descent was swift, precise, but predictable, too straightforward. Shinku reacted effortlessly, thrusting his longer shinai upward to intercept her attack. The two blades clashed with a sharp crack, and for a moment, Shinku felt the familiar resistance of an opponent's weight pressing against him. And then Kimiko vanished in a puff of smoke. Shinku's brows furrowed. "No, that wasn't a standard clone. I felt the weight." His eyes widened in realization just as two identical Kimikos emerged from opposite directions, charging toward him in perfect synchronization. Their movements were fluid, their expressions unwavering, curly black hair framing crimson eyes alight with determination. The two Kimikos leapt into the air simultaneously, their blades trailing streaks of chakra as they moved with blinding speed. Both Kimiko left behind shimmering afterimages as they carved through the air, their paths forming an unmistakable arc. They were forming an image of a crescent moon. Konoha style. "Dance of the crescent moon." The two Kimikos declared in unison, their voices sharp and resonant as they bore down on their father from both sides. Shinku raised his free hand, forming the fire release seal in a practiced motion. A wall of fire erupted around him, roaring to life and forcing the two Kimikos to halt their attack and leap back. The intense heat radiated outward, dissipating the lingering afterimages in an instant. As the flames died down, Shinku stepped forward, his expression calm but his voice carrying unmistakable pride. "In just 3 months since I began teaching you jutsu, you've not only become adept with the sword style I founded for Konoha, but you've also managed to execute one of its most advanced maneuvers. Not even Hayate was that skilled when he was a genin." Kimiko's cheeks flushed a faint pink at the praise. She dipped her head slightly but couldn't suppress the small, bashful smile forming on her lips. She knew exactly who her father referred to, Hayate Gecko, or Hayate Ni-san as Shinku insisted she address him. The 17-year-old Chunin was her father's protege, the first to master the Konoha-style kenjutsu directly under Shinku's tutelage. Kimiko had spent hours watching her father and Hayate spar, soaking in every fluid movement and calculated strike. She'd often innocently asked Hayate for tips, feigning childish curiosity, but her real intent was always clear: to learn. She loved watching him demonstrate the dance of the crescent moon, her crimson eyes tracing the elegant arcs of his blade. They wouldn't teach her outright, she knew that much. So, she relied on observation, pestering Hayate to repeat the maneuver until she understood it down to the last detail. Her father chuckled, shaking his head as he watched her reaction. "You've been sneaking lessons from Hayate, haven't you?" he teased lightly, his tone warm. Kimiko glanced up, her expression innocent but her eyes betraying a flicker of mischief. "Maybe," she admitted softly, gripping her shinai with both hands. "But only because I want to make you proud, Tu-san." Her father approached her, a warm smile on his face as he ruffled her hair. "And learning how to do the shadow clone jutsu, too. Who taught you that?" Kimiko kept her expression even, a serene smile gracing her lips. "I learned from watching you, Nei-san, and Hayate Ni-san," she said lightly. "And Naruto," she added silently. "For 500 and more episodes." The truth was, the shadow clone jutsu wasn't terribly complicated in theory. It required only a single hand sign and the ability to expel chakra from your body, directing it to where you wanted the clones to form. The trick, and the reason it was classified as an A-ranked jutsu, was the sheer amount of chakra required to create even a single clone. For most shinobi, attempting it would either deplete their reserves or leave them vulnerable. Said Shinku. "Well, I suppose you proved to me you know what you're doing, unlike other girls your age." A few months ago, her father would have scolded her for being so reckless, his stern voice echoing through the training yard. But now, there was nothing but resigned pride on his face, a flicker of admiration softening his usual sharp gaze. Sparring with her day after day had given him insight into who she was, not just as his daughter but as a shinobi in the making. She would never stop pushing herself, always testing the boundaries of what she could achieve. And he understood now, she wasn't reckless for the sake of it. She calculated her risks, always staying just within the line of what she could handle. Shinku also knew exactly how much chakra she had. Even if she misstepped, she wasn't in any real danger, not with the chakra reserves she possessed and her budding control. Though, Shinku began as he stepped back from her, his tone carrying the weight of both teacher and father, "Your technique could still use some polishing. You rely too much on speed. Speed without strength won't serve you well in a real fight. You need to train your body to endure, so you won't flinch at every bit of damage." Kimiko nodded solemnly, her tanto held loosely at her side. She respected her father's critiques more than anyone's, but the teasing glint in his eyes made her pause. "And," Shinku continued, his voice adopting a lighter tone, "I see your control still struggles with 2 shadow clones." A faint blush crept up Kimiko's cheeks at that. Creating 2 shadow clones was no small feat. Most shinobi couldn't even manage one until they were well into their jonin years, and some never could, their reserves simply too meager. But here she was, not even a genin yet, holding her own against the limitations that others would never surpass. Her lips quirked into a small, wry smile. "Is this what it feels like to be a prodigy?" she thought, the warm, unfamiliar sensation of pride settling in her chest. "But, a woman should never neglect her promises," said Shinku as he placed his bamboo sword on the wicker where identical ones were placed in. Shinku narrowed his eyes at Kimiko when it was clear Kimiko was clueless as to what he was saying. "You promised Sasuke you will have dinner with him and his family today." Realization dawned on Kimiko's face. She'd almost forgotten about the dinner amidst the day's excitement. Shinku chuckled softly, shaking his head. "Your mother prepared your clothes. Go on, get dressed. You wouldn't want to keep the Uchihas waiting." Kimiko bowed slightly, her composure intact. "Thank you, Tu-san," she said before hurrying off, silently grateful for her parents' perceptiveness. "Oh, Kimiko-chan. Sasuke here tells us you're the best kunoichi in your year. Is that true?" Makoto asked warmly, passing a bowl of rice and curry to Kimiko, who accepted it with practiced grace. Kimiko straightened her back, careful not to fidget as she responded. Her mother's meticulous etiquette lessons echoed in her mind, reminding her to leave the perfect impression, especially when dining in someone else's home. "Sasuke-kun is being too kind," she said with a modest smile. "I've been fortunate to have parents who've instilled the importance of diligence and hard work. I'm not nearly as skilled as Sasuke-kun. He inspires me to improve every day." Her response struck the perfect balance between humility and praise, and Makoto's approving smile showed that it hadn't gone unnoticed. Fugaku, seated at the head of the table, gave her an appraising look before nodding slightly. "You're well-mannered and perceptive. Traits every shinobi should cultivate. No wonder Sasuke speaks so highly of you." Sasuke beamed, leaning forward in his seat. "Kimiko-chan is amazing. She's the strongest in our class after me. She's already mastered the clone, substitution, and transformation jutsu, and she can even make shadow clones." His eyes sparkled with pride, his grin wide enough to rival Naruto's. Kimiko blinked at the unexpected praise, her cheeks warming slightly. Fugaku raised an eyebrow, visibly impressed. "A shadow clone? At your age?" His voice carried a hint of surprise. "That's not a simple jutsu. It seems you have talent on par with Itachi's at this stage." A momentary silence fell over the table at the mention of Itachi, the empty seat opposite Fugaku serving as an unspoken reminder of his absence. Makoto, ever gracious, quickly steered the conversation to lighter ground. "It seems our Sasuke is quite fond of you, Kimiko-chan," Makoto said with a playful lilt. "I can see why, so bright, polite, and pretty. You have all the boys in your class distracted, don't you? Let's just hope Sasuke doesn't spend too much time ogling you." Kimiko's eyes widened slightly, her lips parting in surprise, but before she could respond, Sasuke choked on his water, his face turning a deep shade of crimson. "Ka-san," he whined, looking both mortified and flustered. Kimiko pressed a hand to her mouth to stifle her giggle. "Thank you for the compliment, Makoto-san," she said softly, her voice steady despite the amusement twinkling in her crimson eyes. The warmth and ease of the family's dynamic settled over the table like a comforting blanket. Makoto's radiant smile, Sasuke's boyish enthusiasm, and even Fugaku's rare approval painted a picture of a family bound by love and pride. But for Kimiko, the moment was bittersweet. It was hard to sit here, sharing a meal, knowing what was coming. Her gaze flicked to Sasuke, who grinned at her in between bites of food, and her heart ached. It was one thing to know a tragedy was coming, but it was something else entirely to be powerless to stop it. Still, she promised herself that when it happened, she wouldn't abandon Sasuke. She would stand by him no matter how far he tried to push her away. "Kimiko-chan, have some more curry," Makoto said, breaking through her thoughts. "You're growing into such a lovely young lady. Make sure to keep up your strength." Kimiko smiled and accepted the offer, letting herself be pulled back into the moment. For now, she could only do what she'd always done. Do her best and hope it'll pay off in the end. Kunoichi classes began in their second year at the academy, open exclusively to the girls. Compared to their other lessons, these felt more like social gatherings than rigorous training sessions, at least on the surface. Their instructor was a matronly kunoichi with a perpetually kind smile, the type that could mask a hidden sharpness. Kimiko had no doubt the woman could wield her tea ladle as effectively as a kunai if needed. The classes covered a range of skills deemed essential for a kunoichi's survival and mission success. They were taught a variety of traditional Land of Fire dances, along with a few from neighboring countries, meant to help them blend seamlessly into foreign environments. Lessons in playing stringed instruments followed, an area in which Kimiko discovered she was utterly hopeless, much to her quiet frustration. The same couldn't be said for ikebana, where she quickly proved to be second only to Ino. There were also lessons on formalities, tea ceremonies, sewing and embroidery, wearing proper attire like formal kimono, and mastering the art of makeup application. Each lesson seemed designed to cultivate an air of grace and refinement, preparing them to infiltrate the highest echelons of society if required. At first, Kimiko had felt a flicker of indignation at the implications. Her modern sensibilities bristled at the idea of using womanly charms as tools for missions. But as the lessons progressed, she realized how deeply the martial aspects were woven into the curriculum. This wasn't just about learning to look elegant or poised, It was about survival and adaptability. They were taught to identify poisonous herbs and flowers, as well as how to arrange bouquets in ways that could hide lethal toxins. They learned to conceal weapons in places no man would think to search and how to wield everyday items as improvised tools of defense. Their instructor emphasized deception and adaptability as paramount. The art of passing as a high-born lady wasn't just about appearances. It was about how to manipulate perceptions to their advantage. It wasn't lost on Kimiko that the skills mirrored those of historical geisha or courtesans, famously utilized as spies even in her original world. These classes weren't her favorite, but even she could see their appeal. They provided her with a chance to mingle with girls her age, something she often realized she was sorely lacking. If she were being honest, it frustrated her that most of the people she could truly call friends, Sasuke and Naruto, were boys. They were loyal companions, and she cared for them dearly, but even her mother had gently chided her for not cultivating friendships with other girls. "There are things men cannot even hope to understand about us, Kimiko," Kaori had said one afternoon, her hands deftly embroidering a floral motif on a silk scarf. "A good lady surrounds herself with other women she can trust and rely on. It does not reflect well to be disliked by your peers." Kimiko couldn't deny the truth of her mother's words, but it wasn't as if she'd intentionally isolated herself. Most of the other girls in her class either resented her for her closeness to Sasuke or found her intensity off-putting. Her drive to excel, to push herself further and faster, had left little room for the camaraderie that came so naturally to others. She'd tried to brush it off as a necessary sacrifice, but even Kurenai, her effortlessly popular sister, had voiced her concern. "You can't spend all your time training, Kimiko," Kurenai had said during one of her rare visits home. "A kunoichi needs allies, and that doesn't just mean your teammates. Don't underestimate the value of friendships." So, Kimiko resolved to make an effort. This class seemed like the perfect opportunity to bridge that gap. But changing first impressions was far harder than she'd expected, and most of her attempts at conversation fizzled awkwardly. For the most part, she remained on the fringes, quietly working on her embroidery while the others chattered in their little groups. That was, until one day, when she overheard a few girls' voices cutting sharply through the usual hum of the classroom. "Why are your eyes like that?" A lanky-looking girl sneered, her tone dripping with condescension. "They're so weird." "You're pretty weird, Hinata." Kimiko's hand froze mid-stitch, her crimson eyes snapping to the scene. Hinata Hyuga, her pale, pupilless eyes downcast, stood fidgeting with the hem of her sleeve as two older girls loomed over her. She mumbled something inaudible, her soft voice drowned out by their laughter. Kimiko's jaw tightened. The frustration she'd felt earlier about her own struggles faded into the background, replaced by a surge of protective anger. Similar to the one she felt when she saw the same scene with Naruto. She set her embroidery aside and rose to her feet, her movements calm and deliberate as she approached the group. "Strange," Kimiko said, her voice cutting through the laughter like a cold blade being pulled from the silk sheath which covers it. The girls turned, startled by her sudden presence. "I was under the impression we were here to learn, not to embarrass ourselves by acting like petty bullies." One of the girls frowned, her confidence faltering. "We weren't." "You weren't what?" Kimiko interrupted, her tone devoid of warmth and soft. "You weren't mocking someone for something so asinine? You weren't mocking someone for possessing the Byakugan? Hinata is not the only one who looks like that. Her father does, too. Are you mocking the Hyuga clan, an important clan who protects our village? Who protects your family?" She made sure they would feel the venom dripping from her tone. She could never master the way her mother seemed to sound ill-affected even when she's displeased. Because that's exactly what it sounded like. Hinata's wide, surprised eyes flicked up to meet Kimiko's, and for a brief moment, the tension in her posture seemed to ease. The older girls muttered half-hearted excuses before shuffling away, clearly unwilling to confront Kimiko further. Turning to Hinata, Kimiko softened her expression and offered a small smile. "Are you all right, Hinata-chan?" Hinata nodded quickly, her cheeks pink as she fumbled for words. Thank you, Kimiko-chan." Kimiko met Hinata's gaze, and she only just noticed how they were exactly the same height. "You don't need to thank me. Those girls were out of line, and you don't deserve that kind of treatment." Straightening, she added, "You have nothing to be ashamed of. Your eyes are beautiful, Hinata-chan." For the first time, a small but genuine smile graced Hinata's lips. You really think so? Kimiko nodded, her own smile widening. Absolutely. From that day forward, Hinata began sitting beside Kimiko in class, and she quickly found the girl to be earnest, if painfully shy. She was a surprisingly intelligent and well-mannered young girl, and they quickly bonded because of their similar upbringing and lessons. Though Hinata's own etiquette lessons were taught to her by her Hyuga tutors, unlike Kimiko, who was taught by her mother. And slowly but surely, Kimiko started to feel a shift in her place among her peers. She wasn't just the intense girl who always trained too hard, she had friends, and she never let them fight alone. It all came to a head during one of their Ikebana lessons when Kimiko noticed Ino, by far the most popular girl in their year, approaching her and Hinata with an air of confidence. Trailing behind her was a pink-haired girl with a ribbon in her hair, Sakura Haruno. Another familiar and important face in Naruto's story. Wow, Kimiko-chan, said Ino, her bright blue eyes glinting with curiosity. You're really good at Ikebana and matching the colors. Kimiko paused, offering Sakura a polite smile before returning her attention to Ino. Not as good as you are, Ino-chan. Your arrangements are always praised by the instructor. I wish I could be as good as you. Ino blinked, visibly surprised by the compliment. Kimiko noticed the way her hand instinctively brushed a petal off her lap, a gesture of self-assurance touched by modesty. Before Ino could recover, Kimiko turned her gaze to Sakura, whose hands nervously fidgeted with the bow in her hair. And you're the best at embroidery in our class, Sakura-chan, Kimiko continued smoothly. Could you help me with mine? I can't seem to get the pattern right. Sakura's head snapped up, her green eyes wide with surprise. It was clear she hadn't expected to be singled out, let alone praised. A faint blush spread across her cheeks, and for a moment, she seemed at a loss for words. You think so? Sakura finally stammered, her voice tinged with both uncertainty and delight. Kimiko gave her an encouraging nod, and something shifted in the air between them. In tandem, the two girls' faces brightened, and they immediately moved to sit beside her and Hinata, who shyly smiled at them. The sight made Kimiko's chest warm. Hinata deserved to feel included, too. As the four girls settled in, Kimiko stole a glance at Hinata, who seemed relieved to have company. She couldn't help but feel a quiet sense of pride. Perhaps this was what her mother meant when she spoke of the importance of female companionship. It wasn't just about appearances, it was about forging connections that could strengthen them all. In a world written by men, it felt oddly satisfying to start building relationship between women. Or girls, in their case. This marked a sharp turn in Kimiko's personal life. Once accustomed to solitude or the company of Naruto and Sasuke, she now found herself surrounded by peers. When she wasn't training with Sasuke or playing with Naruto, she often spent time with Hinata between classes, walking her out of the academy at the end of the day and exchanging polite nods with the Hyuga scion sent to escort Hinata home. Ino, however, was not content with casual interactions. She frequently went out of her way to invite Kimiko and Sakura to her family's flower shop. There, Ino would either gush about flowers, especially the poisonous ones, which she dryly noted were Kimiko's favorites to learn about, or half-heartedly study with the other two. Inevitably, though, their sessions always circled back to a certain Uchiha. Sasuke's so cool, isn't he, Kimiko-chan? Ino asked one afternoon, sprawled across the floor with a half-finished assignment abandoned beside her. Her bright eyes rested on Kimiko, who sat cross-legged with her usual grace, always the picture of composure. He is very talented, Kimiko replied evenly. I'm glad to be his friend and chosen sparring partner. I learn a lot from him. Oh, so you're just friends? Sakura interjected, her curious green eyes flickering to Kimiko, then to Ino, who suddenly looked far more interested in the answer. Kimiko blinked, momentarily caught off guard. How did one explain to two infatuated 7-year-olds that their classmate was more of a training partner than a romantic interest? We are more than friends, Kimiko began carefully. She saw their faces fall and quickly continued, we are comrades. We are shinobi. We push each other to be our best. He has helped me improve my skills more than anyone else, and I have nothing but respect for him and his skills. Her polite smile gave nothing away. She didn't need to directly address their hopes about Sasuke. Oh, you're so serious, Kimiko-chan, Ino teased, though her shoulders relaxed, and a playful grin replaced her earlier tension. No wonder he likes you. Kimiko stifled a small laugh behind her hand, though her thoughts grew more somber. Should she intervene in this budding rivalry? She remembered how the original anime depicted their friendship unraveling during the Chunin exams, driven by their shared affection for Sasuke. It felt petty, a wasted bond over something as trivial as a boy. If she could prevent that, wouldn't it be worth the effort? Sasuke doesn't just like me. He respects me, Kimiko said with a calm smile, her crimson eyes meeting theirs. He respects that I want to be a great shinobi, just like he does. And he knows that if he loses focus, I will catch up to him, or even surpass him, she added, her tone light but confident, with just a hint of playful challenge. Ino blinked, her mouth opening slightly in surprise. Huh, she said finally, as if she'd never considered this perspective before. Beside her, Sakura furrowed her brows, seemingly deep in thought. Kimiko allowed herself a small smile before returning her gaze to the book in her lap. It was a biography on Tsunade, one of the legendary Sannin, whose strength and brilliance had positively shaped countless shinobi lives. Strength wasn't just about power, Kimiko reflected. It was about the respect you earned, the goals you pursued, and the confidence you carried. This might only be the start, but with time, perhaps even Ino and Sakura would realize that beauty was far more than skin deep. It was a lesson worth teaching, one kunoichi to another. The day started like any other, though there was an undercurrent of something unspoken, a tension hanging in the air. Kimiko noticed it immediately, though she tried to brush it off. Her father insisting on accompanying her to school was unusual, but she reasoned it might just be his overprotectiveness. After all, it wasn't unheard of for parents to hover, even if she thought she'd outgrown it. Still, the streets were quieter than usual, not empty, but subdued. A faint pall of dread seemed to settle over the village. Kimiko caught the wary glances exchanged between adults as they escorted their children to the academy. She dismissed the uneasy feeling, though it lingered at the edges of her mind. When she reached the classroom, the weight in the air seemed heavier. Iruka-sensei, who was usually so full of energy, looked pale, as if he'd seen a ghost. But the final, undeniable sign that something was wrong came when she looked to the seat beside her. Sasuke's seat. Empty. He's never late. Kimiko spent the day trying to focus on her lessons, but the absence gnawed at her. By the time the academy let out, she couldn't bear it anymore. "To-san, I want to see Sasuke. He wasn't at school, and he never misses school," Kimiko said, her voice trembling slightly as she entered their home. She found her father sitting in the garden, a serious expression on his face. Shinku sighed deeply and beckoned her closer. He pulled her onto his lap, something he hadn't done in years, which only made her apprehension grow. "Kimiko," his tone was heavy, filled with unspoken sorrow. Something very bad happened to Sasuke and his family. She didn't need to hear the rest. Her breath caught, her chest tightening painfully as realization dawned. The Uchiha clan massacre. A knot formed in her stomach, her mind reeling. She had known it was coming, but knowing and experiencing were two different things. The weight of guilt crashed down on her, guilt for knowing and doing nothing. She had trained, studied, and pushed herself to the top of her class, but in the end, she was still just a child playing at being strong. Kakashi was a genin at her age. Itachi had been a prodigy. And yet here she was, powerless to protect the people she cared about. She clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms. She felt like a fraud. Her father's voice broke through her spiraling thoughts. "I won't let you go to the Uchiha compound," Shinku said firmly. "It's dangerous. If Itachi comes back for Sasuke, you could be caught in the crossfire." Kimiko nodded stiffly, though her heart ached. She understood his logic, but it didn't lessen the helplessness that consumed her. Weeks passed before Sasuke returned to school, but the boy who walked into the classroom was not the same Sasuke she knew. He had always been introverted, but when you got to know him he was just as eager to interact as other kids. But the Sasuke who came back was quiet and cold, and even to Kimiko, his closest friend in the academy, his responses curt and distant. He refused to meet her gaze, his once easy camaraderie replaced with a wall of ice. What hurt most was his abrupt withdrawal. Gone were the days when they would spar after school, pushing each other to improve. Now, he went home immediately, his focus shifting to something darker, more obsessive. Kimiko tried to respect his distance, sensing that he needed space, but it stung nonetheless. In his absence, Kimiko leaned on her new friends. She practiced taijutsu with Hinata and Naruto, marveling at Hinata's quiet determination and Naruto's boundless energy. During one sparring session, Kimiko teased Hinata about her obvious crush on Naruto, only to have the Hyuga girl turn crimson and beg her not to tell. She spent her ninjutsu practice time with Ino and Sakura instead of Sasuke, though their skills paled in comparison. They mostly watched in awe as Kimiko performed jutsu with effortless precision, occasionally asking her to demonstrate techniques. Kimiko's growing circle of friends extended beyond Hinata, Ino, and Sakura. Naruto, ever eager to include her in his adventures, introduced her to Choji Akamichi and Shikamaru Nara. The pair, like Naruto, often stuck together during breaks and after school. Shikamaru, as expected, was an unmotivated child who seemed to view life itself as a chore. He often sighed deeply, calling everything he didn't enjoy a drag. While his laziness occasionally amused Kimiko, it also frustrated her when his apathy extended to group activities. Choji, on the other hand, was surprisingly sensitive and kind. His genuine warmth and polite manners endeared him to Kimiko far more than Shikamaru's nonchalance. One afternoon, Naruto convinced them all to play ninja in the field behind the academy. As Kimiko effortlessly outpaced Shikamaru during a mock spar, the boy scowled and muttered, "It's weird playing with a girl. Especially one who can kick my butt." Kimiko tilted her head, her crimson eyes narrowing slightly. "Maybe you should try harder, Shikamaru-kun," she replied, her tone light but pointed. She didn't miss the way his cheeks flushed slightly, though he only grumbled something about it being too troublesome. Choji, however, was quick to offer her encouragement. "You're really good, Kimiko-chan. I don't think anyone in class could beat you except Sasuke." His sincerity brought a small smile to her face, and she found herself appreciating his presence more with every interaction. Meanwhile, Hinata introduced her to her own small circle of companions. Kiba Inuzuka was brash and boisterous, his boundless energy matched only by his loyalty. His sharp tongue occasionally earned him a warning glance from Kimiko, but his heart was always in the right place. Shino Aburame, by contrast, was quiet and enigmatic. Kimiko initially found his reserved demeanor puzzling, but as she got to know him, she came to admire his calm intelligence and subtle sense of humor. The four of them didn't spend as much time together as a cohesive group, as Kiba and Shino seemed naturally closer to each other. Their shared interests and similar temperaments often drew them into their own world, leaving Hinata somewhat on the sidelines. This left Kimiko as Hinata's closest companion during their interactions. At first, Hinata seemed shy and hesitant with Kimiko, her words barely above a whisper even after the time they spent together in their kunoichi classes. But as the days went by, Kimiko noticed subtle changes. The Hyuga eras started to open up, her gentle smiles becoming more frequent and her voice steadier. It was clear she appreciated having someone who treated her with patience and kindness, a kindred soul who didn't see her as just a quiet, nervous girl but as someone with potential. Kimiko, for her part, found herself enjoying Hinata's company more than she expected. She'd even go as far and say that she enjoyed her company the most out of every other friend she had. There was a quiet strength in the girl, hidden beneath layers of self-doubt, that Kimiko found both inspiring and familiar. It reminded her of her own struggles to assert herself in a new and challenging world. One afternoon after class, as they walked toward the academy gates where Hinata's caretaker awaited, Hinata hesitated, her steps slowing. She glanced nervously at Kimiko, her pale, pupilless eyes flickering with uncertainty. "Kimiko-chan," she began softly, her voice barely audible over the murmur of other students, "thank you for spending time with me. I don't feel alone when I'm with you." Kimiko's chest tightened at the quiet vulnerability in Hinata's words. She stopped walking, turning fully to her friend with a warm smile. "We're friends, Hinata-chan," she said, her tone gentle but resolute. "That's what friends are for." Hinata's cheeks turned a soft pink, her shy gaze dropping briefly before she looked back up at Kimiko with a tentative but heartfelt smile. Inspired, Kimiko reached into her pocket and pulled out a piece of lavender origami paper. "Wait a moment," she said softly. Holding the paper in her palm, she exerted a precise flow of chakra, her movements smooth and practiced. Before Hinata's widening eyes, the paper folded itself repeatedly, each crease sharp and deliberate, as if an invisible hand guided it. In moments, a delicate, intricate flower rested in Kimiko's palm. "It's a chakra-controlled trick my Nei-san taught me," Kimiko explained, holding the paper flower out to Hinata. "I'm giving it to you as a sign of our eternal friendship." Hinata's eyes filled with wonder as she accepted the flower with trembling hands. For a moment, she stared at it as if it were the most precious thing she had ever received. Then, without hesitation, she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around Kimiko in a tight hug, entirely unbothered by the curious glances of other students. Kimiko froze for a heartbeat, then smiled, gently returning the embrace. This, she thought, is why friendships matter. When Hinata pulled back, her face was glowing with gratitude. "Thank you, Kimiko-chan," she whispered, her voice trembling with sincerity. Kimiko chuckled softly, brushing a stray strand of Hinata's hair out of her face. "Anytime, Hinata-chan. You're never alone." Carving out a place for herself felt like a triumph. The fear of being a forgotten, nameless person in her second chance at life had all but vanished. Naruto's exuberant praise, Ino and Sakura's admiration, Kiba's lingering glances, and even the warmth of Hinata's friendship were tangible reminders that she mattered. She belonged. But no matter how deeply she immersed herself in training or friendships, the shadow of Sasuke's grief lingered at the edges of her thoughts. It was a quiet, persistent ache, a reminder of the fragile boy who once shared his aspirations with her but now seemed so far away. She couldn't forget the hollow look in his eyes or the way his once innocent smile had disappeared, replaced by a mask of determination and solitude. "I couldn't save them," she randomly thought during one of her sleepless nights, guilt and frustration swirling within her. "But I can make sure Sasuke doesn't face this alone." Her resolve hardened. No matter how much he pushed her away, she would remain by his side. He didn't have to face the darkness alone, not while she was still standing. It seemed her growing friendship with Hinata hadn't gone unnoticed. One day, as Kimiko walked Hinata out of the academy like she often did, the Hyuga scion who fetched her, Ko Hyuga, as she had learned, paused before leaving. With a formal bow, he handed Kimiko a neatly folded letter before taking Hinata's hand and escorting her away. Curious, Kimiko opened the letter on her way home. The elegant script within caught her attention immediately. To Ms. Yuhi Kimiko, the Hyuga clan cordially extends an invitation to you and your family to join us in celebrating the Hyuga clan heir, Hinata Hyuga's birthday celebration, this coming 27th of December, held at the Hyuga clan compound. We thank you for your generosity and graciousness. Hiyashi Hyuga, head of the Hyuga clan main branch. Kimiko furrowed her brows as she read, noting the absence of an RSVP. When she showed the letter to her mother that evening, her suspicion was confirmed. There's no RSVP because it's expected that we attend, Kaori explained, her voice thoughtful. The Hyuga don't often invite people outside their clan to join celebrations as personal as this. Shinku nodded, his arms crossed as he leaned back in his chair. It's true. Despite how familiar I am with Hiyashi's father, Old Man Hiromi, having served alongside him during the Second Great Shinobi War, I was never invited to the main branch compound. He turned his gaze to Kimiko, who sat as demurely as possible. Hiyashi and his late brother, Hisashi, even gave you a gift when you were born. I doubt you remember that. I remember it vividly, actually, Kimiko thought dryly but kept her expression polite. Of course, father. I would be honored to attend Hinata's birthday celebration. Shinku's expression brightened, and Kaori smiled warmly. Good. The Hyuga don't extend such invitations lightly. It's not just a birthday party, Kimiko. It's an acknowledgement of your friendship with Hinata, and perhaps more. Kimiko inclined her head, a polite smile on her lips, but inside her thoughts whirred. Konoha, as different as it was from the real world, had something painfully familiar. Equality, while idealized, wasn't truly a reality. Not everyone here was treated the same, no matter how much the village wanted to believe otherwise. Officially, all shinobi were equal under the system, distinguished only by their rank, not by their clan or background. But, as with most ideals, reality painted a different picture. Konoha's shinobi could broadly be categorized into two groups: clanless ninja and clan ninja. Clanless ninja, often referred to as first-generation shinobi, were exactly that: shinobi with no ties to an established ninja clan. These individuals were usually the first in their families to take up the mantle of a shinobi. They formed the backbone of Konoha's forces, brave and skilled, but lacking the inherent advantages that came with clan affiliation. Clan ninjas, on the other hand, hailed from ninja clans, which weren't necessarily clans in the traditional sense of a single extended family. Instead, they were more like coalitions of families united by shared ancestry or purpose. For many clans, their identity stemmed from a common ancestor who had developed foundational jutsu. These techniques became the basis for their secret clan arts, honed and passed down through generations. The Yamanaka, Akamichi, and Nara clans were classic examples of this structure, each one specializing in a unique jutsu upon which most of their other clan jutsus stemmed from. Other clans, however, had been forged through unification rather than by a single, shared founder. These were founded by charismatic and often military leaders who managed to consolidate several warring factions and clans, as well as their wealth and secret knowledge, under a single name and banner. Clans like the Shimura and Sarutobi fell into this category, earning their prestige through shared history and loyalty rather than a single trademark jutsu. Yet the most prestigious ninja clans of all were the ones descended from ancestors with rare, inheritable traits, Kekkei Genkei. These genetic quirks enabled abilities no outsider could replicate. The Uchiha, with their Sharingan, and the Hyuga, with their Byakugan, were prime examples. Their unique powers elevated them, setting them apart from other shinobi, and afforded them influence and status within the village that bordered on nobility. At least before the Uchiha's massacre. Now only the Hyuga can claim such status. It was easy to see why these clans commanded so much respect. Their histories were steeped in both power and influence, and their contributions to Konoha were undeniable. But this prestige also bred secrecy. Clans guarded their techniques fiercely, and outsiders were rarely, if ever, privy to their inner workings. Clan ninja also often performed tasks not only for Konoha but also for their clan heads. Aside from that, clan ninja often had to contribute to their clan's coffers, and in exchange get certain benefits like access to their clan's vaults and archives of jutsu. For all its ideals, Konoha was no stranger to hierarchy. Clan ninja had access to generations of specialized training and secret jutsu, while clanless ninja were left to make do with their own ingenuity, raw talent, and what techniques were kept in the public access section of Konoha's jutsu was why someone like Minato Namikaze was so revered. A clanless ninja who rose to the pinnacle of Konoha, becoming Hokage through sheer genius and relentless hard work. Minato's story wasn't just one of personal triumph. It was a symbol of what could be achieved even without the backing of an established clan. He was the first Hokage of truly humble origins, a beacon for every first-generation shinobi in the village. Kimiko, technically, was a clan ninja, but the Yuhi clan was still in its infancy. Her father, Shinku, was a first-generation shinobi who had carved out a place for their family in Konoha. Through skill and dedication, he had risen to become a highly regarded jonin, responsible for overseeing the education of all Konoha's genin and chunin, a position widely regarded to be a prestigious post for those retired from active field duty. Her sister Kurenai, meanwhile, was making waves of her own. A formidable kunoichi, she was already earning whispers that she would soon ascend to the rank of jonin. Kimiko didn't doubt it for a moment. She knew her sister's future, after all. But what truly amazed her was how Kurenai had achieved everything by forging her own path. When Konoha-style kenjutsu, the style their father had pioneered, didn't suit her, Kurenai hadn't been deterred. Instead, she had crafted an entirely new set of jutsu for her own use, one that made great use of her prodigal skill on genjutsu, relying solely on her creativity and intellect. Kimiko considered herself fortunate. She resonated with the kenjutsu style Shinku developed, and it had become a foundation for her growth. She didn't have to face the daunting challenge of starting from scratch the way Kurenai had. But even with that advantage, Kimiko knew that couldn't rely on the strong clan infrastructure someone like Hinata or even Sasuke. There would still be some parts of shinobi life she had to navigate on her own, like finding her chakra affinity. For today though, she could just prepare for her close friend's birthday party. The Hyuga compound was immense, larger even than the Uchiha compound, with an imposing elegance that spoke to its centuries-old legacy. Every detail of the estate exuded the Hyuga clan's characteristic precision, from the meticulously trimmed hedges to the polished stone pathways that guided guests toward the main house. Even the air seemed to hum with discipline and decorum, a stark contrast to the warm and casual atmosphere of most civilian gatherings. The festivities were already in full swing when Kimiko and her family arrived. Dozens, if not hundreds, of shinobi swarmed the compound, their polished attire glinting faintly under the soft glow of paper lanterns strung along the courtyards. The sound of polite conversation and measured laughter carried through the air, blending with the faint strains of traditional music being played somewhere within the estate. Kimiko's eyes widened as she took in the scene. Though grand, the gathering carried an unmistakable air of military precision, every detail orchestrated like a well-planned campaign. She quickly realized the celebration wasn't merely a birthday party for Hinata. It was a display of the Hyuga clan's enduring strength. In the shadow of the Uchiha massacre, this event was as much a political statement as it was a personal celebration. The Hyuga were flexing their power, reminding the village, and perhaps those beyond it, that Konoha's strength had not diminished. Ko Hyuga, ever poised and formal, greeted them at the gates. His pale eyes swept over the group, pausing briefly on Kimiko's father. "Shinku-sama," Ko said, bowing deeply. "The Hyuga clan is honored by your presence. Hiyashi-sama personally requested your family attend." Kimiko's brow arched slightly at the statement, her mind catching the subtle weight of Ko's words. She noted her mother's and sister's faint reactions, Kaori's almost imperceptible nod of approval, and Kurenai's barely contained curiosity. It was rare for a host of such stature to personally send for guests, a gesture that marked both great respect and expectation. Shinku, ever composed, responded with equal grace. "We are honored by Hiyashi-sama's invitation. Please, lead the way." Ko bowed again and turned to guide them through the compound. As they followed, Kimiko's gaze roamed over the gathering. Her red kimono, matching her sister's, swished lightly with each step. A single red flower ornament tucked into her loose black hair added a delicate touch to her otherwise formal appearance. The Hyuga main house loomed ahead, its architecture austere yet regal. Within its grand hall, important shinobi from various clans mingled, their distinct insignias a vivid tapestry of Konoha's diverse clans. At the center of it all sat Hiyashi Hyuga, his expression as unreadable as the pristine white robes he wore. Seated just below him was Hinata, her small frame stiff with practiced decorum. She looked ethereal in her light lavender kimono, but her lowered gaze hinted at nervousness. Beside Hiyashi, a woman bearing a striking resemblance to Hinata cradled a baby in her arms, the infant's features favoring Hiyashi's stern countenance more than hers. Kimiko's sharp eyes darted between them, noting the family resemblance and deducing the woman's identity as Hinata's mother. As they entered the hall, Kimiko felt the weight of several gazes settle on them, curiosity and polite interest mingling in equal measure. Her father's steady presence grounded her, his calm confidence a reminder to carry herself with poise. The four of them approached Hiyashi and his family, their footsteps light against the polished stone floor. When they reached him, it was Shinku who spoke first. "Hiyashi-sama, my family is honored by your invitation," Shinku said, bowing low. His family followed suit, bending deeply at the waist. Kimiko could feel the weight of Hiyashi's pale, inscrutable gaze settle on them, heavy and unyielding. After a pause that felt like an eternity, Hiyashi's calm voice broke the silence. "You do not need to bow so low, Shinku-sama. You fought and bled alongside the Hyuga. You are a friend to us. It gladdens my heart to see such friendship extend to the next generation." Kimiko's posture remained impeccable as she kept her head bowed, though she knew he was referring to her and Hinata. "Yes, my daughter speaks glowingly of her friendship with the Hyuga heiress," Shinku replied smoothly. Hiyashi gave a small nod. "Indeed, and my daughter has spoken with high regard for your daughter's conduct and skill. You are fortunate to be blessed with such accomplished and beautiful daughters, Shinku-sama." Kimiko resisted the urge to glance at her father, feeling Hiyashi's gaze shift to her. "Young lady," he said, his tone steady but faintly warm, "the Hyuga are grateful for your kindness and camaraderie toward its heir." Kimiko raised her head just slightly, meeting his gaze with a composed smile she had practiced countless times. "Hiyashi-sama, I am honored to share such friendship with the Hyuga clan's heiress. I only regret not knowing her sooner. She allowed her smile to soften as she glanced at Hinata. Hinata-san is an esteemed friend, and the bond we share is something I will always treasure. Her words were measured, and they landed with precision. She saw a faint but genuine smile bloom on Hinata's face, mirrored by a softer expression on her mother's. Hiyashi gave a satisfied nod, his approval unmistakable. Well spoken, Hiyashi said. It seems my daughter has chosen her companions wisely. Which reminds me, Shinku, have you heard about the latest Chunin exams held in Iwagakure? As the conversation between Hiyashi and her father shifted to broader topics, Kimiko found herself tuning out. Her father, ever the tactician, gave her a slight nod, a subtle suggestion to mingle and make herself known among the crowd. Kimiko excused herself quietly and drifted into the bustling celebration, her crimson eyes scanning the room for familiar faces. The room was a sea of pale eyes and finely tailored robes, voices blending together in polite murmurs and laughter. But as much as she searched, she couldn't spot anyone from her academy class. Am I the only one who was invited? The thought settled uneasily in her chest. Though this celebration was ostensibly for Hinata's birthday, it quickly became apparent that the focus wasn't on the Hyuga heiress's happiness. Hinata was busy entertaining dignitaries and guests, her small frame moving from group to group under Hiyashi's watchful gaze. This wasn't a birthday party, her birthday just proved to be a convenient excuse. Her crimson eyes softened with sympathy. Poor Hinata, to have your birthday turned into a political affair. How miserable must she feel? The realization dulled her earlier excitement, and she wandered toward one of the quieter corners of the compound. Away from the noise and opulence, she found herself standing alone, the cool night air brushing against her cheeks from an open window. Her hand absent-mindedly smoothed the fabric of her red kimono, the silk catching the light of the lanterns. Not enjoying the party? Came a quiet, even voice from behind her. Kimiko turned, her crimson eyes meeting the pale, sharp gaze of a boy about her age, maybe a year or so older. His long, dark hair was tied neatly, framing a face that was undeniably handsome but carried a weight far too heavy for someone so young. She recognized him instantly. Neji Hyuga. Hinata's cousin and a prodigy, even at his age. Someone who would have been the head of the Hyuga clan if he wasn't born of the younger twin. Someone who lost a father and developed such a bleak outlook in life, who believed in the futility of going against what he thought was fate, before Naruto, in his usual way, talked some sense into him. Someone who'll die in the future. She dryly thought. She made it a habit to remind herself whether someone she meets was someone who'd die in the future. I wouldn't say that, Kimiko replied, offering a polite smile. But it seems this celebration isn't quite what I expected. Neji's lips twitched into something between a smirk and a grimace. That's because it isn't. You're perceptive. He leaned slightly against the wall, his posture relaxed but his gaze watchful. This isn't for Hinata-sama. It's for the clan. Rather, it's for the main branch. Kimiko hesitated, unsure how to respond to the quiet bitterness in his tone. Even so, she said gently, Hinata-san seems to be handling it with grace. Neji huffed a faint laugh, though there was no humor in it. Grace, he repeated. That's what's expected of her. It is her duty. And there it was, the burning spite that Neji held for Hinata and the main branch. As resigned to his fate as he was, the boy still detested the Hyuga heiress, who he was expected to give his life for. The person who, to him, was the reason as to why his father died. If only I can tell you what really happened. Kimiko tilted her head, studying him. He looked at her directly, as if daring her to pry further, but there was a flicker of something else in his gaze. A subtle softening, a faint curiosity. She was used to people looking at her, but Neji's gaze lingered in a way that was different. It wasn't just curiosity or admiration, it was as though he were trying to figure her out, to place her in the rigid framework of his world. Forgive me if I'm speaking out of turn, she said softly, but expectations can be heavy, even for someone as strong as you seem to be. Neji's pale eyes widened briefly before narrowing again, but he didn't answer right away. Instead, he straightened, stepping closer to her. She caught a faint whiff of sandalwood and something distinctly clean, almost sharp, like freshly fallen snow. And what would you know about strength? He asked, his voice quieter now, almost contemplative. Kimiko's smile didn't falter, her gaze holding his. Enough to know it's not just about skill or power. Sometimes, it's about enduring things that feel unbearable. Neji narrowed his gaze. Strength is strength. It's the capability to make the world your own. If it doesn't help you do your duty, then it isn't strength. Neji flatly said. Kimiko held her ground, a bit prosaic. She stated, "Do you suggest that the ability to endure and persevere isn't important in a shinobi?" "It is, but not as much as skill and talent," said Neji. "A person can be the most driven and enduring person in the world, but if fate decrees that they be mediocre, they can never be anything but." "So you think you were blessed by fate, then, to be as talented as you are?" Kimiko replied, teasingly. News about the Hyuga prodigy above their year wasn't scarce in the academy. "I am what I am, and you are who you are," said Neji stiffly. "What talents I have is something I will use, regardless if someone thinks I'm blessed or not." Then maybe we can see which of us fate smiled upon longer," said Kimiko. "We can have a match should we make time, taijutsu? If you'll allow me to use my father's Konoha-style kenjutsu, then you can use your juken, to make it fairer and even for you," said Kimiko, averting her gaze from Neji. Neji's expression flickered, the faintest hint of surprise crossing his features. As if he would never expect someone to actually challenge him in a spar, at least, someone who sounded genuinely confident in their chances of victory. For a moment, he said nothing, his gaze dropping briefly to the delicate flower ornament in her hair before returning to her eyes. "You're different," he murmured, almost to himself. "Is that a compliment, Hyuga-san?" she teased lightly, a playful lilt to her voice. Neji blinked, his cheeks faintly coloring as he realized what he'd said. "Don't read too much into it," he muttered, turning his face slightly away, though not before she caught the way his lips twitched upward in the barest hint of a smile. Kimiko laughed softly, a sound like the chiming of wind bells. "Of course not." The moment stretched into a comfortable silence, the two of them standing together in the quiet corner as the distant hum of the celebration continued around them. Kimiko's thoughts briefly flickered to Hinata and how this boy before her, despite his jaded demeanor, likely carried more weight than he let anyone see. "I hope we can talk again sometime," Kimiko said finally, dipping her head politely. "I'd like to know more about someone Hinata-san speaks of so highly. And my offer for a spar is genuine." Neji raised a brow, but there was a subtle warmth in his gaze now, a crack in the icy exterior he wore so carefully. "Perhaps," he said, before inclining his head in return. "Enjoy the rest of the evening, Yuhi-san." As he turned and disappeared into the crowd, Kimiko found herself smiling throughout the rest of the celebration. The years went by in a blur, marked by progress and change. Though Neji never took her up on her offer to spar, Kimiko never let that slow her down. She threw herself into training, pushing past the academy's increasingly simplistic lessons. Tree walking and water walking became routine, and she seamlessly integrated them into her daily chakra control exercises alongside her origami practice. But no matter how much effort she poured into her training, it was painfully clear, she had outgrown the academy. Among her peers, only Sasuke kept pace, though even he had become more muted over the years, his aloofness now tinged with a cold distance that cut deeper than before, as if she was something he couldn't spend too much attention or time on. Kimiko often wondered if the of them might have graduated early, but the third Hokage's recent policy to prevent children from entering the battlefield too soon kept them tethered to the classroom. Still, Kimiko wasn't one to waste time, and what truly set her apart was her rediscovery of a powerful tool: the strategic use of shadow clones. The realization came during a painfully boring afternoon at the academy. On a whim, she summoned a clone to chase Naruto and Choji during the game, and as they laughed and tumbled through the fields, a long-forgotten idea clicked into place. Shadow clone training. She remembered how the trick had been taught to Naruto years later in the canon. The ability to double, or triple, productivity by using clones to perform simultaneous tasks was, frankly, broken. The memories and experiences returned to the user upon dispelling the clones, effectively allowing someone to learn twice as fast. There were risks, of course. Fatigue from the clones carried over, meaning too much could leave her physically or mentally drained. But the potential gains were too great to ignore. Her first experiment was simple. She sent a single clone to the library while she attended class. The clone spent the entire day poring over books on plants and poisons, topics she'd been meaning to study more thoroughly. When she dismissed the clone that evening, the rush of new knowledge was exhilarating, though it left her feeling a bit more tired than expected. From then on, she started using the technique sparingly but effectively. A clone might spend hours practicing kenjutsu in the empty garden at home while the real Kimiko attended the academy. On other days, it might train in shuriken throwing, repeating precise movements until the muscle memory carried over to her real body. She kept her efforts discreet. If anyone asked why her progress seemed so rapid, she would simply smile and credit her diligence. It was thrilling, almost intoxicating, to feel herself growing faster and stronger, as if she had twice the hours in a day. Not everything went smoothly, though, especially when it came to discovering her elemental affinity. Kurenai murmured, holding a slip of wet chakra paper between her fingers. Kimiko stood before her sister, her crimson eyes fixed on the results. The memory of this exercise flashed through her mind. It was something Kakashi had done for Naruto in the original timeline to determine his chakra affinity. After pestering Kurenai for weeks, she finally found time to help her figure out hers. Now, newly promoted to Jonin, Kurenai had indulged her little sister's curiosity. Water-natured, Kurenai concluded, her tone neutral but with a hint of surprise. A slight frown marred her features. It's not unheard of for someone to have a chakra nature different from their families, she added, trying to soften the blow. Kimiko sighed, rolling the paper between her fingers. Of course, she knew that was true, but it didn't make it any less disappointing. She suspected her chakra affinity had been influenced, perhaps disrupted, when her consciousness was thrust into this body. Both Kurenai and their father had fire-natured chakra, like most Konoha citizens. This difference meant that what little elemental jutsu their fledgling clan possessed wouldn't initially work for her. It doesn't matter, Kimiko declared, straightening her back. I'll just grab a C-ranked water jutsu from Konoha's jutsu archives once I save up enough mission money. Her resolve was firm, though she knew it wasn't going to be easy. Konoha's centralized jutsu archives weren't free. The village purchased jutsu from clans willing to part with their techniques, though no clan ever sold its most secret or powerful jutsu. Some clans, like the Hyuga or the now extinct Uchiha, never sold any of their jutsu at all. Because of this, access to the archives was restricted. Genin could only peruse scrolls containing E, D, and a select few C-rank jutsu, while Chunin gained access to more advanced techniques, including some rare B-rank jutsu. To get what she wanted, Kimiko would need both money and a promotion. But that didn't deter her. Very resourceful, Kurenai remarked with a smirk, clearly pleased. But don't forget, you're not exactly lacking in your repertoire. You've already mastered all the basic academy jutsu, and both Tu-san and Hayate-kun keep bragging about your Konoha-styled kenjutsu. Her eyes sparkled with pride. Not to mention shadow clones. And of course, she trailed off teasingly, the techniques I taught you. Kimiko nodded, a small smile playing on her lips. From her sister, she'd learned the ninja art, blossoming escape, an upgraded version of the substitution jutsu. It wasn't just an escape technique. The explosion of petals served as both a distraction and a flourish, perfectly aligning with Kurenai's style. Beyond that, Kurenai had taught her 2 D-rank genjutsu. The first, flower petal fragrance, filled the target's senses with an overpowering, cloying floral scent, inducing nausea and disorientation. The second, falling petals illusion, created a swirling storm of petals that completely obstructed the target's vision, buying the user precious moments to attack or escape. They're useful, Kimiko admitted. But I'll probably never be as good as you at genjutsu. Kurenai smiled softly. It's true, genjutsu isn't just about control, it's about strategy and creativity. You need to bait your opponent, trap them in layers of deception before springing your attack. She paused, assessing her younger sister with a critical but affectionate gaze. But you're more like Tu-san in that way. You prefer direct, decisive action. It's not a flaw, it's just a different kind of strength. Kimiko nodded again, absorbing the lesson. Her sister was right. Genjutsu required a mind like Kurenai's, subtle, patient, and meticulous. Kimiko's approach to battle, while precise, was much more straightforward. She favored swift, decisive strikes over the layered intricacies of psychological warfare. Still, the knowledge she'd gained was invaluable. Even if genjutsu would never be her specialty, It was another tool in her growing arsenal. Kurenai hummed though. You're pretty well equipped, and this isn't even mentioning how massive your chakra reserves are or how good you are at using them, Kurenai remarked dryly, her tone teasing but tinged with genuine admiration. I think, in your year, only Naruto has more chakra than you. Kimiko nodded, her expression thoughtful. It wasn't a secret how much her chakra pathways maturing early had benefited her. Aside from possibly being the reason for her exceptional chakra control, her naturally large reserves gave her the initial boost of optimism and confidence she had so desperately needed as a young academy student. Oh, and don't forget about your recent discovery, Kurenai added, a sly smirk tugging at her lips. Kimiko couldn't help but return the smile. Her latest discovery had been nothing short of fascinating. At first, it was subtle, fleeting impressions that she had brushed off as coincidence. She would feel someone's presence moments before they appeared, sense Iruka-sensei approaching the classroom before hearing his footsteps, or instinctively know that Naruto was up to something long before he sprang into action. But over time, as she trained and sharpened her focus, the sensation grew stronger, more deliberate. It was as though a hidden radar within her had been switched on, allowing her to pinpoint chakra signatures with increasing clarity. She found she could identify people without seeing them, simply by the unique feel of their chakra. For example, her mother's chakra was faint but distinguishable, a modest ripple shaped by years of proximity to shinobi, enough to stand out against the background of non-shinobi. Her father's chakra, by contrast, was vast and unyielding, like a towering willow that had withstood the ravages of wildfire, scarred, yet resilient and deeply rooted. Kurenai's chakra, though smaller in reserve, was unlike any other she had encountered. It felt like a fragrant summer breeze, gentle and warm, carrying faint whispers and giggles that demanded attention. There was something enchanting about it, something that made Kimiko instinctively alert whenever her sister was near. When Kimiko first described the sensations to Kurenai, her sister's reaction had been a mix of surprise and pride. That means you're a sensor type, like me, Kurenai had explained, her voice calm but pleased. Someone who can sense chakra and distinguish its unique qualities. It's a rare skill. I'm glad I'm not the only one in this family. You should leave some talent for the rest of us, though. So yes, said Kurenai, breaking her thoughts with a teasing smile. You're more than qualified to graduate and become a genin. And if you decide the regular forces aren't for you, the medic corps will always welcome someone with your talent. At least as a genin, you're unlikely to face mortal danger. Kimiko nodded absently. It was true, most genin, especially during peacetime, rarely encountered life or death situations. But her mind kept circling back to the exception, Naruto's class. Their lives had been anything but ordinary. Missions that stretched them beyond their limits, battles that would have broken most shinobi twice their age. Her thoughts churned. Most shinobi quietly advanced to chunin and took desk jobs in logistics or education. But could she be satisfied with that? No, she couldn't see herself walking that path. Well, anyway, Kurenai said, ruffling her hair affectionately before disappearing in a blur of motion. It's a moot point. Tomorrow's your final exam. Get some sleep. Kimiko stood still for a moment, letting Kurenai's words sink in. Was she ready? She had spent years training, studying, and preparing for this moment. But being ready to graduate and being ready to be a ninja were entirely different things. Would she be able to handle the reality of missions? The thought of facing human enemies, of being expected to kill, gnawed at her. She had trained for it, mentally prepared herself, but could she truly be ready until the moment came? No. There was no point dwelling on it. She pushed the doubts aside and went to bed. The next day passed in a blur. The written exam was straightforward. She finished first, double-checking her answers out of habit. The practical exam came next, and her execution was just as flawless. When Iruka handed her the Konoha forehead protector, she stared at it for a moment, her crimson eyes wide with disbelief. Congratulations, Iruka said warmly, ruffling her hair as he tied the protector around her head. You're tied with Sasuke-kun for top of the class. Kimiko barely heard him. Her gaze was fixed on the forehead protector, the symbol of her achievement, of her identity as a shinobi of Konoha. This is it, she thought. I've done it. But then Iruka's words jolted her back. Naruto-kun's exam? Iruka's expression faltered. He went before you. He didn't pass. I'm sorry. I know you two are close. Kimiko's heart clenched. Of course, she knew what would happen next. Mizuki would use Naruto's failure to manipulate him into stealing the Forbidden Scroll, which contained the multi-shadow clone jutsu, Naruto's signature jutsu, alongside the Rasengan. As much as it pained her, she couldn't interfere. That moment was crucial for Naruto's growth. Naruto and Iruka cemented their bond. "I'm going to find him," she lied, smiling tightly at Iruka before darting out of the room. Instead of searching for Naruto, she headed to the rooftops, her chakra boosting her leaps. The wind whipped through her thick black hair as she soared over the village, her crimson eyes scanning the horizon. Her heart thudded with exhilaration. She had done it. She was free. Free to begin the next chapter of her journey, to forge her own path, and to fulfill the promises she had made to herself. She landed on a rooftop, gazing out at the sprawling village below. The weight of her forehead protector was a reminder of the responsibility she now carried. This is just the beginning. THSTA all for now. If you enjoy, then please like, share and do comments.